I call to order the regular meeting of the Lakewood City Council, February 10th, 2014. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Murphy?
Here.
Shakti? Here. Roybal?
Here.
Johnson?
Here.
Quinn?
Here.
Paul?
Present.
Coop?
Here.
Fairway?
Here.
Kellen? Wickman? Harrison?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, and as always, I'd like to welcome everyone, and thank you for taking part in your local government, either by being here tonight or watching us at home on Channel 8 or following us online on the website. As always, I would ask that people in chambers silence their audio devices, cell phones, etc. But again, welcome. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silent prayer. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Will the clerk please read item 4 into the record?
Item 4, Resolution 2014-6, appointing members to the Lakewood Advisory Commission for an Inclusive Community.
And as is our custom, I would turn it over to the chair of the City Council Screening Committee, Councilor Cindy Barraway, for the motion.
Mayor Murphy, thank you. First of all, I see a few of the faces, the names of the faces that go together out there in the audience. I see Dina and Nicole. And Patricia. I don't see Cynthia. Tricia's over there. Sorry. Oh, there's Cynthia. How could I miss you back there? And Cindy Girk, I don't think I see. But I have Nicole Goodman, Dana Gutwin, Tricia Merkel, and Cynthia Vitale. And I really do appreciate you all coming out for the interviews and taking interest in wanting to serve your city through the Advisory Commission for an Inclusive Community. We had some wonderful candidates, and I'm very happy to, once this gets passed in terms of the resolution, to welcome you to the ACIC. So with that, I'd like to make a motion to approve Resolution 2014-6.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. And any comment from City Council? Karen.
I would like to thank you ahead of time. I was one of the members of the screening committee that got a chance to interview all these wonderful people, and we are getting some wonderful talent on the ACIC, and I'm really thrilled. You guys are going to have a lot of fun. Thank you very much.
I echo that. We all very much appreciate your willingness to serve, and we look forward to working very closely together with you. Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. And the motion passes unanimously. It's now official. Welcome. Thank you again. Yeah. We all just kind of charged down from an orientation session that we have this time of year for not just new council members, but some reminders for all of us from members of the management team. So everybody's still kind of settling into their place here. All right, this is the point in the meeting where the public is invited to address City Council on items that do not appear on the agenda. All comments should be directed to the City Council. I ask that all in attendance observe the decorum of City Council chambers, refrain from applause or audible discord with the speaker. And there's, as always, a 3-minute time limit. And you'll see when you come down here a green light for the first 2.5 minutes, at which point there'll be a yellow light for the last 30 seconds. When it turns red, your 3 minutes time limit has been reached, at which time we would ask you to wrap up your comments. So those who have, I'll start with those who have indicated a desire to speak by signing up on the roster, and then we'll open it up to anyone else who wishes to speak on a non-agenda item. The first name is Todd Massett. Sorry. How'd I do? I mean, I gave it 2 shots. So in other words, I didn't nail it, did I? Massad. All right. No, thanks.
It takes the projector just a moment to warm up.
And the clock is not ticking.
Good. I get like 10 seconds. Just sit down.
Yeah, it's working on our monitors.
So my name is Todd Massot, M-A-S-O-T, and I live at 14 Wright Court, which on the map is actually on this bank of townhomes right here. And there's like 15 townhomes in that row, so 15 different homeowners. There's about 90 some odd of us in the whole subdivision. And really, I'm probably here to voice a little frustration over something I probably don't have much control of at this point anymore. But the history is that these were built in the 80s, and Mr. Prop owned all the property, including the VA building that's marked there, and then the property that I've highlighted down below our townhomes there. At the time that they built the VA building, Mr. Prop was very courteous to the homeowners, and he built a 5-story building on that property, and he took into consideration the homeowners and their views there. During the rezoning, the portion that's been highlighted, the height restriction was thrown out, and unfortunately, it was increased about 30 feet higher than the level of our backyards. Our view to the east, of course, we all value. My point in the whole purpose of being here really is that it seems like during the zoning process, the consideration of the homeowners, who are the tax-paying citizens, should have been, actually, anybody that went there and stood should have said, you know, what is in the best interest of the people who are the tax-paying citizens here? And you could see large buildings can be built on there and still kept the height restriction low. Well, it is going to be developed now, and it's going to be developed with a luxury apartment type complex, of which the developer, just for the record, I'm perfectly happy with and all, and he's trying to be as accommodating as possible, but the unit that he wants to put on there, and this is somewhat arguable at this point, but it's either going to be slightly higher than our backyards or even a little bit higher to where it actually could obstruct the enjoyment of all of our properties along that line. And I would just like to say, if you guys in the future are going to approve zoning, and is it Mr. Parker? That some consideration and thought process be put into the fact of the enjoyment of the citizens of the city and their investments in their properties. I want to publicly thank Ramey and Adam for listening to our concerns and trying to affect some change. Again, none of us are fighting the fact that it was going to be developed. We just wanted that consideration is all. And that's about all I have to say on that.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And it's
Thank you for
a situation we're aware of. Thank you. Miranda Hayes, a non-agenda item.
Good evening. My name is Miranda Hayes, Hayes, and I reside at 3985 Carr Street. I would like to come before the council this evening as a concerned citizen of the county and bring to the community's attention a huge loss that was suffered this weekend and to raise awareness of what is happening in the area. This past Saturday was a very sad day for the families of Jefferson County Public Schools. The superintendent, Dr. Cindy Stevenson, has been forced out of her position by the newly elected school board and will be resigning as of February 21st. I'm very concerned about this on many levels. As a Jefferson County taxpayer, I would like to know what was discussed by the majority of the board members of the Jefferson County School Board in closed sessions with a private attorney that's being paid for with our tax dollars before and after Cindy's announcement of her resignation. As a Jeffco employee, I would demand a transparent process in the search for a new superintendent, as the school board has stated that they will pursue as of December 12th. And I would bring this to the attention of the council as a fellow governing body in the local area. An open process as far as the selection of a new superintendent per Colorado's open meetings law will uphold the integrity of the law of the school board of the county and of other governing bodies such as yourselves. We face a challenge here in Lakewood and in all of the county as to finding an equally qualified superintendent, and I hope there will be a fair and open selection process. Finally, as a graduate of Lakewood High School and the daughter of career-long Jefferson County teachers, I'm saddened personally by the loss of the community that we have suffered with the departure of our respected leader. Dr. Stevenson is an award-winning superintendent, and her leadership will be sorely missed. I very much appreciate your time and consideration and allowing me to just openly discuss this issue in front of the council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hayes. Anyone else in chambers wish to comment on a non-agenda item? All right, with that, I will close public comment and certainly echo Ms. Hayes' comments in terms of the tribute to Cindy Stevenson. There will be time to follow for much more of this to come out, but I do want to thank Cindy for her years of service. As she would be the first to tell you, she's been with Jefferson County Schools since she was 5 years old, right? Graduate of Lakewood High School and been with the district for 34 years and a fantastic superintendent for 12 years and a great friend to all of us. So we certainly wish Cindy well in her new endeavors, and we will have plenty of time to say goodbye and visit with her. But we honor her wonderful service to the students of Jefferson County these last decades. So thank you, Cindy. I do want to, before we go into the next, anyone else on council? Okay, before we go into the next section, I do want to recognize, I believe we have a scout that came in. Aha, he's got a jacket over the shirt. He is traveling incognito. Could you introduce yourself and tell us what troop you're with and what school you go to? Oh. All right, and you're here for a citizenship badge, or? Yeah. Well, welcome. Thank you very much for coming. All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. The use of the consent agenda has been made to expedite council action. It contains both resolutions and first reading ordinances. Resolutions are items of a routine nature, which the members of the public will have an opportunity to comment on in a moment. There's actually one on the agenda tonight. First reading ordinances, and there are a couple of those tonight, appear on the agenda only for the purpose of setting future public hearing dates and ordering the newspaper publication of the proposed ordinance. Therefore, no public comment will be heard this evening on the content of the first reading ordinances. The public will have the opportunity to comment on the proposed ordinances during the scheduled public hearings on the dates set tonight by City Council. Any council member may request an item on the consent agenda be removed for separate discussion and action under general business. So at this point, would the clerk please read the items on the consent agenda into the record?
The consent agenda consists of items 6 through 9 inclusive. Item 6, Resolution 2014-7, establishing projects and project funding levels for the 2014 Capital Improvement and Preservation Program Neighborhood Participation Program. Item 7, Ordinance O 2014-5, authorizing the repair of Bear Creek Lake Park facilities, including a supplemental appropriation to the 2014 annual budget, further declaring an emergency. Item 8, Ordinance 2014-6, amending Title V of the Lakewood Municipal Code by adding a new Chapter 5.29 regarding licensing of commercial waste haulers operating in the city of Lakewood, Colorado. And item 9, approving the minutes of the special city council meeting of September 30th, 2013, and the regular city council meetings of October 28th, November 25th, December 9th, 2013, and January 24th, 2014.
Thank you. At this time, I will open the public comment period on the proposed resolutions contained in the consent agenda. Resolution, singular. No one's indicated a desire to speak on it by signing up. Anyone in chambers wish to comment on item 6? We did have a study session on this matter last week. Councilor Roybal and Councilor Wickman.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to pull items 8, ordinance 2014-6 from this and put it under general discussion.
Sure. It's just slightly out of order, but that's fine. Let me close public comment, and you don't have to repeat that. We will. You've asked, and it shall be done. Councilor Wickman. Same thing?
Yeah, same thing.
Okay. So, absent any public comment, I'm ready for a motion. Councilor Coop on the consent agenda, absent item 8.
Mayor Murphy, I move for approval of council minutes for acceptance of the minutes of boards and commissions. Order all ordinances introduced on first reading to be published in the Denver Post, with public hearings set for the date included in the ordinance, and for adoption of resolutions, all of which are included in the consent agenda items introduced into the record by the city clerk.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the consent agenda. Again, absent item 8. We keep checking to make sure I'm quoting that right. Any discussion on the consent agenda? If not, please cast your votes. And it passes unanimously. And one last thanks to Holly and the planning department, and to all of the folks who put in applications for the neighborhood participation program. We've had now I've forgotten the number, 180 or something projects since 1992. It's really a great program to do some nice things in our neighborhoods. So thank you all very much. All right, on to ordinance. The rest of the agenda. We have 2 ordinances on second reading.
Excuse me?
Councilor Roybal?
Oh, you said 2. Okay.
We have 2 items on second reading.
Sorry.
Okay. Will the clerk please introduce item 10?
Item 10, Ordinance O 2014-3, amending Sections 1.16.020 of Title I of the Lakewood Municipal Code pertaining to general provisions, amending Sections 6.01.010 and 6.04.015 of Title VI of the Lakewood Municipal Code pertaining to animals, and amending Sections 9.38.020, 9.38.030, 9.38.040, 9.38.060, 9.38.070, 9.44.010, 9.64.010, 9.64.020, and 9.65.010, and repealing sections 9.65.020 and 9.65.030 and adding sections 9.38.045 and 9.38.075 of Title IX of the Lakewood Municipal Code pertaining to public peace and safety.
Nice job. All right. We'll now open the public hearing on this item, and we're going to start out with a staff presentation from Janet Young. I was going to say our annual chance to hear from you, but once or twice a year when we update things to align ourselves with various other statutes and regulations, we get to hear from you. Thank you, Janet. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Janet Young, Deputy City Attorney, and I wanted to just give you a brief overview of the ordinance in front of you tonight. As Mayor Murphy said, it is the yearly update that I do to Title IX and assorted provisions to reflect the changes made by the legislature in the previous session. Some of the major changes are, first of all, updating the theft limitations in municipal court. The legislature last summer increased the felony thresholds for theft charges from $1,000 to $2,000 or more. So I have correspondingly amended the municipal provisions regarding theft, including shoplifting, price switching, to allow municipal court to hear cases involving thefts of under $2,000. It had previously been under $1,000. I also have put forth in the ordinance provisions repealing theft by receiving and theft of rental property because the legislature has consolidated those into the general crime of theft. So we have mirrored the provision that the state legislature had passed, and the theft by receiving and theft of rental property have now been rolled into the general theft provision. Then last summer also the legislature updated the Colorado Clean Indoor Air Act to extend the indoor smoking bans to include marijuana. And the definition of smoking has been amended to include marijuana smoking. This will ensure that smoking marijuana will be prohibited in the same places where currently smoking tobacco is already illegal, such as retail stores, restaurants, bars, bowling alleys, healthcare facilities, museums, libraries, and assorted public facilities. It will be illegal to smoke marijuana in these facilities as it is currently to smoke tobacco. It remains illegal to smoke marijuana openly and publicly in such places as our parks, sidewalks, parking lots, patios of restaurants, and patios of bars. However, when the legislature amended the smoking provisions to include marijuana smoking, they neglected to amend the part of the Colorado Clean Indoor Air Act that provides exemptions for tobacco smoking. So we're trying to close that loophole in our ordinance by specifically stating that it is illegal to smoke marijuana in a tobacco business, in a tobacco cigar bar, or in a hookah bar. We think that's really what the legislature intended to do, but they neglected to amend that separate provision that provides the exemptions. The proposed ordinance closes that loophole and makes it very clear that smoking marijuana would not be permitted in these retail businesses where smoking tobacco is allowed. And then finally, the definition of drug paraphernalia has been amended to clarify that it doesn't include any marijuana accessories used by a person 21 years of age or older as a result of Amendment 64 and the changes made by the legislature last summer. That's pretty much the high points of the proposed ordinance in front of you.
All right. Thanks, Janet. Appreciate your work as always, and it's a lot of detailed material trying to align all these with the constant changes at the state, so thank you. Looks like we have a question, Janet. Yeah, let's Adam's going to have a question, but let's go through the procedure here. We'll ask for public comment. Nobody's indicated a desire to speak on this by signing up on the roster. Mr. Hosey, did you want to speak? And then Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Sorry for being a little late today. My name is Steve Hosey. I'm a business owner here in Lakewood, and I also own a residential property here in Lakewood. First of all, I want to say thank you to the city staff, thank you, the city attorney, thank you, city manager, the mayor, and the council for listening to what I had to say and taking action and moving forward on this issue. I read the proposal. I think it's great. I hope you vote unanimous for it. I would ask that the staff goes back and adds 2 more items. While the city staff said it's not legal to smoke marijuana at a restaurant patio area, you didn't take it out of your ordinance. So guess what? It still is. While the city staff said it's illegal for some things, number 6 and number 7 in the ordinance of the exceptions did not get removed. Number 6 is the outdoor area of any business, including patios of liquor licensed establishments or business established where food or beverages are used. It wasn't much a week or so ago that I was at the Mills. My wife, my daughter, my 20-month-old, and I went to eat. We were going to go eat at Twin Peaks. We chose not to because of the strong smell of marijuana coming from their outdoor patio. Instead, we went over to Genghis Grill. Number 7, a place of employment that is not open to the public, that is not under control of an employer, employs 3 or fewer employers or employees. There are pipe shops that employ less than 4, so they employ 3 employees. And those owners are going to argue that they've meet this requirement because the back of their shop's not open to the public. Do you want to allow that shop owner to dictate to their employees that they got to breathe marijuana smoke in that shop because it meets number 7? So I would say number 6 and number 7, after you go ahead and move forward, maybe you want to be reconsidered by the city attorney for the next update to the ordinance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hosey. Anyone else? All right, with that, we will close public comment, and I'll ask the obvious question, Janet. If you want to follow up on Mr. Hosey's comments.
Right now, it is illegal to smoke in the outdoor areas of restaurants and bars. We have an ordinance under the marijuana provisions that makes it illegal to open and publicly consume marijuana. So it currently is an ordinance violation. Under the section of the ordinance that talks about outdoor areas, under 9.38030, it specifically says under C that nothing herein shall be deemed to permit the smoking of marijuana that is conducted open and publicly. So the activity that was described in terms of smoking marijuana on a patio at a restaurant, that would be currently illegal. It would remain illegal under this ordinance. As for the outdoor areas of any businesses, including the patios that was referenced under the exceptions, that is an exception to tobacco smoking restrictions. And if you look at 9.38040, I specifically added the terminology tobacco smoking. So it is not permitting the smoking of marijuana. The only exception to the smoking of marijuana in the proposed ordinance is a new provision that was added at 9.38045, which covers private residences and private homes unless they're being used for child care or daycare. Additionally, I think if someone is smoking in the back of a tobacco store, that would still fall under the restrictions that you cannot smoke in a tobacco store. So I think that situation would also be covered by the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Paul?
Thank you. Just had a quick question with the paraphernalia and age of 21. Now, if it's my understanding, are 18 and older allowed to have red cards for medical?
Yes.
But they can't have paraphernalia then?
There's another provision that addresses that. That's in the current ordinance that allows it if someone does have a medical marijuana registry card.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Harrison.
I just have a quick question. I don't know if I don't know how vapor cigarettes work, and I noticed that there was in here it talked about lighting. Can you? I don't know. I honestly don't know. Can you put marijuana in vapor cigarettes? And they're not lit, correct?
There are vapor cigarettes for marijuana. I think that would fall under the open and publicly used provision if someone was using those in a public place. The the state statute of the Colorado Clean Indoor Air Act does not address e-cigarettes currently. The only time that e-cigarettes are addressed under state law is making it illegal to sell to juveniles e-cigarettes.
So do we have it covered enough to where you feel like we're not going to have a violation?
I think we do have it covered if someone is using marijuana. I think that the current state law and our ordinance does not cover the use of e-cigarettes for using tobacco.
Could we add that at some point in the future? I'm not asking it for right now, but could we look at that?
Councilor Quinn.
Just a comment. While I will support this, I just have to say, I think we should prohibit smoking tobacco in tobacco businesses. I've mentioned this before. It's a serious public health hazard. I'm not going to vote against the ordinance. I'm not going to cut off my nose to spite my face, but I just want, of record, everybody to know that I still maintain that we should have done that. So, and I hope to revisit that in the future. Thank you.
I think on the I'm sorry, what are they called? E-something cigarettes. Maybe a memo or something to all of us to indicate if there's any pros. I mean, just bullet points, pros, cons.
Mayor,
so we can all take a look at it.
I believe there's a meeting tomorrow night actually up at Lutheran Hospital about e-cigarettes that we might have all received an invitation to.
Is that from the health department? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
To Councilor Harrison, I'd say it's definitely a growing problem on the radar, and I think something maybe the state legislature should tackle as well. I know that they've had some issues, and the problem is you don't know what you're smoking because the vapor is odorless.
And that's my concern.
Fair enough. All right. Any other comments, questions on item 10? Ordinance 2014-3. We'll get there, yeah. All right, we ready for a motion? I'll keep looking at. Were you in this chair last year? Yeah, oh, okay. Councilor Coop.
I move for the adoption of ordinance 2014-3 on second and final reading.
All right, motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, please cast your votes. And it passes unanimously. We are now officially aligned with all changes at the state level. So thanks again, Janet. We appreciate it. All right, will the clerk please read item 11 into the record?
Item 11, Ordinance 2014-4, amending the Lakewood zoning ordinance and zoning map.
And we'll start out with a staff presentation, and I would invite Evelyn Baker to come forward.
Good evening, Mayor Murphy and members of the City Council. My name is Evelyn Baker. I'm with the Planning Department. And I'm here today to present the staff report for case number OA 13-001, the zoning ordinance amendments. Here's a quick summary of what will be the structure of our presentation this evening. We're going to start off with just a very quick review of the purpose of this 6-month check-in. We'll share some initial observations from staff and from the development community, members of the community as well, in terms of the application of the updated zoning ordinance that was approved in December 2012. And then we'll spend the bulk of the presentation reviewing some of the adjustments that are proposed based on our first 6 months of experience working with the new zoning ordinance. We'll be reviewing the adjustments that were proposed and are summarized in your request for council action packet in the written material that was distributed in advance of this public hearing. And we have a handful of additional adjustments that we'll be describing for you as part of this presentation this evening. And then, of course, we'll follow up with a discussion and questions and answers. So, as you're all aware, in December of 2012, the new zoning ordinance was adopted. This was I believe we were saying a 3.5-year effort to update the new zoning ordinance with a lot of community involvement along the way. At that adoption public hearing, city staff proposed to report back to the Planning Commission and the City Council after we've had the new ordinance in place for about 6 months, so we could share sort of experiences and observations with the first implementation of the new ordinance. So the new ordinance went into effect on April 1st, 2013. That brings us to the 6-month period at the end of October, and that's when we first started our conversations with the Planning Commission. I want to emphasize again that this check-in provides an opportunity to address relatively minor cleanup items. So this isn't intended or was not proposed or intended to be an opportunity to rehash policy debates that had been exhaustive and thorough in the past, but rather to make some minor tweaks and adjustments as we determined were necessary. So some initial observations. In general, the new ordinance has been well received. These are graphics that we shared at the study session on this item a few weeks ago. So in general, we've received more planning applications over the same 6-month period before the new zoning ordinance was adopted when compared to the first 6 months after the zoning ordinance was adopted. In addition, we've received an increase in the number of proposals for townhome developments. That's new. You can see the second graphic there showing the increase in townhome development applications or development proposals that planning staff has received. As you will recall, during the initial adoption period, there was a couple of hot topics. One of them was the introduction of accessory dwelling units into our single-family residential neighborhoods. There was a concern that this would lead to, noticeable densification and a change in the character of our existing single-family residential neighborhoods. In the first 6 months, and in fact up to today, I can't quite do the math, October, November, December, January, so an additional 3 months. So in the first 9 months, there have been no accessory dwelling unit permits issued in the city of Lakewood. Another hot topic was the small animal permits, the introduction of allowing for limited backyard urban agriculture. Over the first 6 months, we issued 43 permits for small animals in backyards, and code enforcement reported that during those first 6 months, they received 17 complaints. Some of those were related to areas where the permissions for backyard animals was increased, was changed. Some of them were related to situations where backyard animals were not permitted, urban agriculture was not permitted, and some of them were related to lots where urban agriculture was previously permitted and it was currently permitted. In any case, so the point being that there was a range of different types of complaints. All of those complaints were resolved. So I want to again emphasize that there's no major policy changes proposed with the amendments that were described in your material that was distributed earlier, or those that we'll describe for you this evening. Really, the amendments that are proposed fall into one of three categories. They're either intended to clarify a standard that was in the zoning ordinance where there were some questions about the application of a standard. They're intended to modify a standard when implementation issues were identified, or intended to provide new standards when an expected standard was not addressed. I'll make a special note that the regulations related to group homes were discussed as a separate matter at the January 13th City Council public hearing. And so those policy issues are not for discussion. They're not intended for discussion this evening. In terms of the new adjustments that we'll be describing for you this evening, in general, there are some formatting corrections. You've probably noticed as you read through the zoning ordinance as many times as we read through it, we see that there are some minor corrections that need to be made in terms of formatting. Again, not major policy issues. These are things where we've got the section numbering got wonky somehow, reference dropped off. We want to correct, make sure those references are correct. And then some table formatting issues. Our new zoning ordinance is very table intensive. We've got a lot of good information in tables. That's a good thing for usability. When you tweak something in that, it kind of messes up the formatting of the table, so we have some adjustments to do there. We've got some other changes that I'll describe for you this evening, and those are going to be integrated into the remainder of the presentation this evening. You'll notice those other changes, those new changes, are going to be called out in red, just to call attention to them. So I'm going to tag team on the going through article by article as we did in the study session. So I'll take the first couple of articles. I'll pass the baton to Paul Rice, one of the principal planners in our planning division, and then I'll wrap things up at the end. So article by article. In Article 1, it's the purpose and administration regulations. We did provide some clarification in here regarding how to measure shortest horizontal distances, so nothing major. It's a clarification point. That's the only change of note in Article 1. Article 2 is our procedures and appeals. We attempted to reorganize this article for clarification purposes to clearly distinguish those planning review applications that are more intensive, that require a formal application and a review from the entire development assistance team. We wanted to separate those more major planning applications from the smaller permit applications like sign permits, building permits, fence permits, and the like. So that was a clarification and a reorganization change that was proposed. One thing that we've modified is we proposed to remove the notice requirements for minor waivers. So any major waiver would still require the notification as described, as approved back in December 2012. But for relatively minor design waivers, we've proposed to remove the notice requirements for those. This is the topic I think that we had the most questions about at our study session, so I'm going to attempt to describe this clearly, more clearly. Article 3 are zone districts, where we describe the different zone districts in the city of Lakewood. One of the things that we've proposed to do is to clean up the zone district definitions to reference the updated residential land use definitions. Now, we provided detailed descriptions of the updated residential land use definitions as part of your written material for review in advance of this meeting. But for the benefit of the audience who may not be as familiar with this, the idea was, our current definitions are shown here on the left. So the definition of a single-family residential land use is a building designed for occupancy by one household on one lot. Multifamily is a building designed for occupancy by 3 or more households living in separate dwelling units. So if you look at the image of the 4 units shown above here, this actually could meet 2 different definitions. The same product looks no change to construction. It's built exactly this way. This is how it's being experienced in the real world to someone walking down the sidewalk. If this development here were to be split so that each one of these units, so there are 0 lot lines, and each one of these units is on its own defined lot as shown here, this would meet the definition of a building designed for occupancy by one household on one lot. If, however, this was not built for individual ownership, but rather was built as one development on one larger lot for rental purposes, ostensibly, then this would meet the definition of multifamily. That is, it's a building designed for occupancy by 3 or more households living in separate dwelling units. It's on one lot here. The thinking was that this didn't make sense to have this product subject to two different development standards, depending on where these invisible lot lines are. Our concern as a planning department really is on making sure that however the lot line configurations are, that this product interacts well within the context. And so we proposed to adjust the definition of the residential land uses to take away the reference to lot lines and number of units on lots. And you'll see later on that we've still attempted to control for the number of dwelling units on lots, but we've done that not through the definition of the land use, but through the development standards that are outlined in Article 5. We'll see if we have questions on that. I'm happy to answer as we move forward. So again, all of the definitions of the residential land uses had been proposed to be updated, and these detailed definitions are included in your packet with also an example of what it is that we're talking about. So here's the words, and here's what we're picturing when we wrote those words. In Article 3, we proposed as well to remove the maximum density for RMF from the description of the zone district. It was a little unusual to have that density standard in just the narrative description of a zone district. If you're going to have density standards, that's typically going to be in your dimensional or development standards. And in this case, it's Article 5. So we took that out of the narrative description of the RMF zone district. In addition, we did propose a new standard in Article 3 that would allow the planning director to approve minor zone district boundary adjustments in conjunction with lot line adjustments. So here's the example on the right of your screen here. We've got we've got two lots here. One is zoned R143, one is zoned R112, and they share this common property line that defines also the zone district boundary. As it turns out, this is a real-world situation. There was a fence that was built in some other configuration, and the property owners wanted to readjust. They wanted to adjust the lot line to match the fence line. So they proposed to move the lot line here, and planning had no objections. All of the minimum lot standards were still met. The tricky thing is now that we've allowed for this lot line adjustment, we've created a split zone parcel. So this parcel here that was previously all zoned R112 now has this odd sliver that's just zoned R143. That's all that this standard is intended to address, is to allow the planning director to approve a minor district boundary in conjunction with a lot line adjustment without having to go through a neighborhood meeting and public hearing for this purpose. Moving on to Article 4. Article 4 outlines all of the different land uses and indicates where those different land uses are permitted in the different zone districts. So we've proposed a number of clarifications and simplifications of that those use permissions. So we've incorporated those new residential land use definitions that we described earlier. We've consolidated live, work, and home occupations into the one broader category that's called home businesses, and then we further regulate them by major and minor. And then daycare and home daycare, we've consolidated that into one use category, which is daycare, with additional limitations if that daycare use is provided in a residential zone district. There's ultimately no difference in the regulations that apply to live, work, and home occupation or daycares today, but it's just a simplification, a clarification, correction. So here's the daycare clarifications. Again, we've allowed it as a principal use in all mixed-use zone districts as it is today. We've allowed it as an accessory use in our residential zone districts, and then we've echoed or replicated the supplemental standards for daycares when they're an accessory use in a residential zone district. So these standards are in our zoning ordinance today, and they're what we propose to carry forward. As I mentioned, there was a full public hearing, a long public hearing on the group home regulations that was held in January of this year. As a result of that public hearing, we had made some modifications to the proposed land use table. The attempt is to clearly indicate that group homes serving 1 to 8 clients are permitted in all zone district, and then to indicate that there may be some additional regulations that would apply for group homes serving more than 8. We've specifically for group homes serving more than 8, we have added the provision that informational notice is provided to property owners and registered neighborhood organizations, and there's a provision as well that those that notice requirement may be waived by the director when required by state or federal law. We'd gotten some feedback initially that we may want to reconsider how we were presenting that use in the use chart. So we have another alternative for how to present that to, again, clearly drive home the point that group homes serving 8 or fewer are permitted by right. And for all others, you've got some additional reading to do, and it refers you to the supplemental standards later on in the article. This is a new proposed amendment that wasn't covered previously. The indoor entertainment facilities, so these would be a bowling facility, a movie theater, something where there's entertainment and it's happening indoor. These types of things these uses were permitted by right in the MN, MG, MC mixed-use zone districts, but were prohibited in the ME mixed-use employment or MR mixed-use residential zone districts. After discussion with the planning director, the thought was that there may be instances where indoor entertainment facilities would be appropriate in these ME or MR zone districts with some additional input from the neighborhood. So what we're proposing to do is to allow indoor entertainment in ME and MR with a special use permit. Again, special use permits require a neighborhood meeting and a public hearing before the Planning Commission. So it's a case-by-case basis. It's not a blanket permission in any zone district. We've also proposed, again, based off of some preliminary feedback in our initial study session, some modification to the supplemental standards related to those, the urban agriculture uses. So we've proposed to reduce the space requirements for hens and ducks to 4 square feet of coop area per bird. And this is consistent with the space requirements for hens and ducks in other residential zone districts where those uses are permitted by right rather than as a limited use. We've reduced the space requirement for dwarf goats after learning that the space regulations that are included in the current zoning ordinance are most appropriate and most are intended for full-size goats. So dwarf goats, not full-size goats, they shouldn't require the same amount of space. So that's been reduced to 10 square feet. In addition, we corrected a typo for apiaries in the M zone district. As described in the material that was provided for you earlier, we're proposing to allow apiaries in mixed-use zone districts with the requirement that they not be located in the front yard. There was a typo in the zoning ordinance that was provided for you, and I wanted to clarify that is what it was intended to state. So Article 5 is where all of the dimensional and development standards for different types of zone districts are laid out. So we proposed a number of clarifications really just in how to measure setbacks and how to provide an intent statement to provide more clarity for the Build 2 zone requirement. As I mentioned, because we've modified the residential land use definitions to take away the reference to the lots. We still want to control and allow only for one principal dwelling unit in R1 zoned lots and up to 2 dwelling units when lot size requirements have been met in the R2 zone district. We've removed that minimum lot size for the RMF zone district, again, to allow for those individual ownership units. And then we've also established a minimum lot width of 18 feet for the residential multifamily zone district. A couple of other final modifications in Article 5. We've adjusted the setbacks by 2 feet for the MC and LI zone districts to account for a required 2-foot clear zone in all public improvements that are provided. And we've also removed some repetitive standards related to the use of plaza areas to meet the Build 2 zone requirements. With that, I'm going to take a break, and I'll ask Paul Rice to join me at the podium. There he is. And I'll be back.
Good evening. My name is Paul Rice. I'm with the Lakewood Planning Department, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Articles 6, 7, 8, and 9. 6 and 7 deal with design requirements. Article 8 is related to parking, and Article 9 is signage. So as we started putting the code together, what we tried to do was Article 6 addresses all things single-family homes and duplex-type homes. And then Article 7 was to look at anything else, multifamily, commercial, mixed-use, industrial, and so forth. And we found that in doing so, we kind of overlooked standards for multifamily-type products. So there's some organization and some movement and then some addition in these three articles that I'll talk a little bit more. One of the things in moving multifamily and then defining attached housing products and moving them into Article 6, we need to repeat some of the standards that were in Article 7 for landscaping, because the landscaping requirements for single-family homes don't necessarily apply well to an apartment project. So we did do that. And then all things parking, we found that it was a little easier to take all the parking standards that were in Articles 6 and 7 and organize those into Article 8. So in addition to Article 6, some of the standards for multifamily, like I said, they were lacking, or the standards that we had didn't work real well. So we came up with some standards that relate to how a building looks, some facade standards, some standards that control how the roof actually looks and works with the building. So you'll see some new design standards for multifamily and attached family products in Article 6. In addition, again, we had to tweak the fence section of the code to deal with a multifamily product. If you look at the photo before you, essentially we will allow a 6-foot-tall fence that's open, and then at the discretion of the director, we may allow for some enclosed fence with a multifamily product. So that's a change you'll see in Article 6 also. In Article 6 and 7, actually, we started looking at our landscaping requirements. And where we have utility lines, whether they're overhead or underground, we didn't have any provisions that would allow for plant material substitution, i.e. you can't really plant a tree with a deep root system over an underground utility line or for that matter, an overhead line. So we came up with some substitution requirements. 10 shrubs or 20 grasses will equate to a tree. Also, the code was set up so that landscaping was required along all the edges of a site. And that kind of reduced some of the flexibility that we were looking at. So we changed the calculation. You're still getting the landscaping for a particular site, but it allows you to take the entire site and then design with the landscaping for the site. And then we also, in thinking about it, the greater the width of a transition area, you had less material because you were using width to address that. But as you started shrinking that width, what we found is we overplanted the strip, and the plants didn't grow well together, or they competed. So we reduced some of the plant material counts in the transition areas. And then we've added some details to our screen wall requirement. One of the things, Article 7, there were some minor tweaks. In the residential zone districts, the R districts, you could have a church, you could have an office building, you could have some other institutional type uses, and we wanted to clarify that the standards in Article 7 actually apply to those type of uses. So if a church were to come in a residential district, we have some standards that we can apply, parking and so forth. The building transparency requirement was not real clear when we actually applied it, so we tweaked that definition. And also defined what parking in a structure. You think of a parking structure with multiple floors. You also have what we call podium parking, where you have a building that's elevated and you're actually parking underneath. And so we wanted to make sure that applicants were clear on what that actually was. And then again, all things that were parking related in Article 7 were relocated into Article 8. In Article 8, again, we wanted to clarify, and it was always the intent, parking maximums don't apply to structured parking. So if you did a surface lot, those were the maximums apply. You put it in an actual structure, you're not taking up space, they don't apply. We found that our bicycle counts for multifamily product was a little low. In applying the actual parking counts, again, in the suburban and urban context, we felt that our parking counts, our maximum counts for religious institutions and restaurants were a little low, so we've proposed raising those. And then we found, again, its actual application of the standards, that there was a difference in parking requests or requirements between elementary and middle schools and high schools. So we're proposing to modify those. And the last article I'll talk a little bit about is signs. We defined if you have a sloping site, how do you measure the height of a sign was a question we came up with. So we clarified that. One of the provisions as you get a development and it gets larger, the sign requirements didn't actually increase with it. So we've tweaked our sign standards so that there's kind of a range of development types. And as you get a bigger, either a single product or something that is multi-tenant, you can get more signage as the development gets larger. And then, again, we did not have sign standards for institutional type uses, and we're proposing to add those to the code also. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Evelyn.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, we're coming around the bend here. Article 10 was a wireless service and communications ordinance. So these are the regulations for cellular antennas, cell installations, and the like. So we did clarify. We're trying to encourage stealth facilities, that is, facilities that you can't tell that they're actual cellular installations. And we wanted to clarify then that the standards that we had for new freestanding facilities applied only to those non-stealth stealth facilities. Article 11, historic preservation, no proposed changes to that article. I will mention that we have formed a historic preservation commission, and they've met on a number of occasions. So we're pleased with the implementation of the historic preservation ordinance to date. Article 12 deals with nonconformities, things that have been grandfathered in that don't currently meet our zoning regulations but did when they were built or initiated. So we wanted to clarify that limited additions or alterations to nonconforming single-family dwellings in mixed-use zone districts may be permitted subject to the R16 development standards. So the setbacks and height limitations for the R16 zone districts would be applied to these nonconforming situations. Finally, Article 13, Article 13 is where you will find all of our definitions and interpretations. So we did a number of clarifications described in the top of the slide, and we've discussed in some detail already. In addition, we fine-tuned some of the definitions to provide more performance-based definitions that account for scale and different levels of external impacts. The example I used, or one of the examples that we discussed at the study session, had to do, for example, with industrial uses. Let's see, I think we talked about bakeries. So if you've got the Hostess Twinkie factory that's pumping up a lot of truck traffic and a lot of manufacturing type of activities, we didn't want that same definition to apply to a small corner bakery where you've got the same products, raw material coming in, same sort of chemical process happening in the same sort of end product, but at a different scale. So that's what that modification related to performance-based definitions is related to. And then finally, we added some definitions for uses that were mentioned in the zoning ordinance elsewhere, but were not defined in Article 13. So examples are the convention center and the multi-tenant center. New proposed amendments since we last talked in Article 13 relate to some relatively minor clarifications for the measurement of lot width and some fine-tuning of graphics that was associated with that. No changes to the actual definitions associated with the graphics, but there was some mislabeling in some of the graphics, so we wanted to correct that. And then I wanted to call to your attention, this is actually, this wasn't a new modification, but it wasn't something that was called out in my previous presentation, that we did simplify the definition for a lot line. So front is the lot line that's closest to the face of the building that's adjacent to a street, and then side intersects those front lot lines, and the rear is basically anything else. So I wanted to call that to your attention here as well. We have one proposed map amendment. So map amendments is misleading up there. It's just map amendment. We're proposing to remap Lakewood Park. That's the property at 150 South Kipling Street, just north of the intersection of Kipling and Alameda. In the prior to the zoning update effort in 2012, all of our parks in the city of Lakewood were zoned R1A. So regardless of where you were, if you were a park on Colfax, you were this bright green R1A. And you can see here actually with Lakewood Park, there's no other R1A anywhere, but that was just the convention for how we zoned parks. With the zoning amendment, what we tried to do then is, because parks were permitted in any zone district, is to give them, to remap those, all parks in the city of Lakewood, to reflect more of the context that they were in. So in the instance of Lakewood Park, we had proposed to zone that to MGU, which was the zoning that was given to the parcel just to the south of it. There were some concerns that this incorrectly gives the impression that there's some other use envisioned for this park. And in fact, we have other controls, as you know, in place to limit the change of use for any designated park or open space. But to address that concern, what we're proposing to do is to change the zoning from the MGU to the R112, which is also adjacent just to the north of Lakewood Park. It was never the intent for this park to be anything but park as a result of the remapping, but just to address that concern, we're proposing to remap that. So again, as I've said a number of times, the purpose of the 6-month check-in was just to do some minor cleanup of some items that were identified in the first 6 months of application of the new zoning ordinance. But I did want to call out that there were some substantive modifications. Again, the residential land use definitions have changed. The development standards for multifamily and attached dwelling units have changed or been introduced where there were none previously. We have proposed to increase some parking maximums in some areas and make some adjustments to sign codes. I know we've spent a lot of time just in this presenting portion of this item this evening, and as long as we've taken, we still haven't shared with you every single change in the zoning ordinance. This is intended to be sort of a summary, and that's why we gave you the entire zoning ordinance with our little notes scribbled off to the side so you could see exactly what changes were being made throughout the entire code. So this was intended to be just sort of a high-level overview of the major changes that were being proposed, as minor as they are. So with that, it's the Planning Commission had recommended by a vote of 5-0, and city staff had recommended that the City Council approve this case. Includes the amendments that were provided in the case materials, the amendments that were described this evening, and again, those minor formatting changes that we know we're going to have to make as pagination changes and things like that in the document. So we're at the questions and discussion portion, and I'll sit back down and wait your questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Evelyn. Great job. Before moving to public comment, and in the interest of clarification, I'm going to turn to Councillor Paul to talk about some proposed language. As you know, when we left off that group home discussion, which we largely closed about a month ago, but we had one sort of leftover topic, that was the table that was referred to in the presentation. And as everyone will recall, it was clearly council's intent to limit group homes in our neighborhoods as much as we felt we could, while still adhering to federal guidelines. So we kind of got down to this up to 8 and 9 and above, and this new table certainly tries to hone in on protecting the neighborhoods, again, as much as possible for the group homes of 9 or more. There's some language, there's a reference in that new table to a section which has some language, and for that, I'm going to turn to Councillor Paul to talk about just a little bit. Adam?
Thank you, Mayor. And I guess before us, when we decide to move forward with this decision tonight, we have two options. We have the table that's here and the table that was presented tonight. And I just wanted a little food for thought. If we do move forward with the second table that's presented, that just deals with the 1 to 8 client residents, it might be worth visiting the actual group home 17.4.3.1L, which states a group home serving 9 or more clients shall be subject to the following. So that's what's currently there, but possibly revisiting that to say, I would propose a group home could be granted a reasonable accommodation for the number of residents based on the following, which then would go into everything that is there below it. So just wanted to clarify that. I've been working with Travis all day, and we didn't have a chance to really hash it all out, so I wanted to get that out there for food for thought before we go into public comment and decide as a group.
Right, and the intention is to be as protective as we think we possibly can. Reasonable accommodation is still in federal law, but we didn't want, by our choice of words, to imply that that reasonable accommodation is a given, which seemed to be a potential interpretation given that language. So, cool? Cool. All right, let's go to public comment. Thank you very much, Evelyn and Paul, and of course Travis. I know this is something council asked for, the 6-month update, and as you said, there's a lot of clarification and a bit of modification, and in some cases a couple of new standards. So, all right, let's go to public comment. I'll start with those who indicated a desire to speak by signing up on the roster. First is Charlie Abel. And of course, as always, the same instructions apply. Y'all are veterans.
I'll try to remember. And thanks for the segue. I'm here to talk about reasonable accommodation. Before the last meeting on this subject, the city attorney gave you folks the joint statement from Department of Justice and Housing and Urban Development. That is, as Mr. Cox indicated, the be-all, end-all, last word they're going to have on group home regulation and how it affects local land use laws. As part of that paper, the Justice Department says, suppose the city's zone ordinance defines a family to include up to 6 unrelated persons living together as a household unit and gives such a group of unrelated persons the right to live in any zoning district without special permission. If that ordinance also disallows a group home for 6 or fewer people with disabilities in a certain district or requires this home to seek a use permit, such requirements would conflict with the Federal Housing Act. On the other hand, it says in the next paragraph, in the case where a family is defined to include up to 6 unrelated people, an ordinance would not, on its face, violate the act if a group home for 7 people with disabilities was not allowed to locate in a single-family zone neighborhood. However, because persons with disabilities are also entitled to request reasonable accommodation in rules and policies, the group home for 7 persons with disabilities would have to be given the opportunity to seek an exception or waiver. From 6 to 7, they would have the opportunity to seek that special accommodation. If the criteria for reasonable accommodation are met, the permit would have to be given in that instance, but the ordinance would not be invalid in all circumstances. I submit to you folks, our limit of 5 citizens unrelated in a single family household has become 8 for group home residents. I don't object to that, but that would seem to be a reasonable accommodation. In fact, that is double the reasonable accommodation the Justice Department and HUD cite in their only paper on the subject. I think if we have to go to court and we argue we were only following HUD and the Justice Department's instructions, that would carry quite a bit of weight as a defense. So I submit we're already 8. That's 3 above the standard of 5. The Justice Department compares 7 to a standard of 6 as reasonable accommodation. So I would submit, folks, we're already there. We don't need to include 9 or 10 as a reasonable accommodation because that's double our number for everyone else. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Edna Smith.
Good evening. The last time I was here, I asked the mayor if there was living quarters in the basement of the group home proposed at 835 South Flower. You said you would find that out for me, and I have not heard. If there is a family living in the basement of that group home, is it being permitted? Does the permit say it's for a single family dwelling, or it's supposed to be a group home? Now, this is proposed to be 5,500 square feet under roof. That does not fit in our neighborhood. And as I understand it, it is supposed to fit in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll get an answer. Okay. Yep. Right now.
Sounds good. The building permit for Flower Street does not show a single-family house in addition to the units. It shows the group home units and no additional housing in the house. So we have not issued any permits for the family or the owner to live in the basement of that unit.
Thank you. Anita Springsteen, please.
If it's okay, I'd like to share time with Karen. She's going to give me her time.
No, you each get 3 minutes. So you guys can each get 3 minutes. You guys know the rules. You guys can split.
Okay, I thought that was the rules, that we could do it that way. The proposed changes to the zoning ordinance amendments regarding group homes still have some issues that need to be resolved. And I was glad to hear mention that there's some attempts being made to do that. The current zoning table obviously says 9 to 12 residents, limited use.
I'll grant you extra time here while we get this camera going. No rush.
Thank you. So we have L's under the 9 to 12 client residents. The proposed table states, see section 17.4.3. We propose that section needs to be taken out. Otherwise, we have exactly the same thing that we have on the current zoning. Additionally, there's language under that section that says 9 or more, where it used to say 9 to 12, and we have concerns about that language changing without a vote. Our preferred table would have an L under only the R2, and then the section would refer to that only. Can you have the proposed up?
Have you, and I'm sorry, Anita, did you see the new table that was put up during the presentation?
Yeah, I thought that was the one.
I think there's an alternative one that I think addresses.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I thought I still saw reference to the section 17.4.3 under those 8 and over. So anyway, I'm glad to hear that there's attention to that. We also propose to change the client residence language to clients and resident staff in all references. To restore the 2006 zoning ordinance language that says group home will not include a hotel, motel, rooming house, or facility housing adult or juvenile offenders. That was removed. And by adding this language to the definition of group home will alleviate widespread public concerns about inadvertently permitting group homes for those that are not protected by the Fair Housing Act. Exceptions for such needs as shelters and battered women and unwed mothers can be added. But this would prevent homes for parolees, juvenile and adult, who would voluntarily agree to live in a group residential facility with other paroled offenders. In the Lakewood Community Correctional Facilities, restrictions are for facilities housing people who are currently serving a sentence for a crime and who are in the facility involuntarily. So Lakewood may be in line with other cities in how we treat group homes for FHA protected classes with these changes, but other cities place far greater limits on group homes for non-protected classes. We are hoping that the city will do something to make amends with the neighborhoods who have been so harmed because of the recklessness in changing the zoning in 2012 that allowed these to go into our neighborhoods. And you can see from the picture what it looks like. And just one more thing I wanted to say is that the way it looks from down here, when some of these changes get made at 2 a.m, when people are too tired to think, is that it's kind of the equivalent of watching a surgeon operate with rusty tools. So I think that you worked hard on that, and we appreciate that. But I just think that a little more time maybe needed to be taken to get this right, so that we're still not confused about what the language is that's going into the tables. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita.
My name's Karen Bushlack. I just wanted to show you a picture. What we're concerned with this humongous building is the drainage issue. There's a slope there that you can see. We just hope that there isn't any problem in the future for our neighbor Sandy. And then this one here, you could just see how big this structure is. It doesn't fit with our neighborhood. It's just humongous. I mean, the house next to it, they just look so small. And also, when I attended the meeting that you guys had on making these decisions, you know, I didn't see that you guys voted for 9 or more. I think you guys missed that one. It should still be 9 to 12. It shouldn't be more than 9, because you guys didn't vote on that one. Thank you.
All right, thanks. And Anita, we appreciate the compliments on the hard work that everybody, including yourself, obviously, and many others in your neighborhood have put in on this issue. Sandy Young?
Me again.
Welcome, as always.
I have pictures. I'm sorry. Now that house on the right of me is my house. The one next to it, it really doesn't look that bad right there as it does if you're standing right there. It looks a little scary, like it's going to open up and swallow it. Right? And you can see the tree in between the two houses. That's the one that all the stomping on the ground with their big machine that they were trying to pat the soil down. It broke a branch off of there the day before Christmas and ruined our Christmas because it didn't split the wire, the power line, but it took it 2 feet off the ground. I mean, it brought it down that far. So the grandchildren that were there couldn't go out and do anything. It was a little scary. And they told us we couldn't even go near it and just be careful what was going on because we had called Excel. Another thing, that pounding had broken, let's see, Parker had gotten a picture of the inside of my house where it had caused, because it was shaking the soil as well, I mean the whole ground as well as the house, and it actually put a big crack in between my living room and hallway. A little scary. And then the other thing was the other one. There's the other tree. But what do? Are you going to come and help, as I asked you before? Did you also know that Kathy Niederhauser, Elaine Karcher's daughter that lives with her now, had gotten someone from the West Mexico place that has the younger people there, and he had come over to her house and knocked on her door at 6 o'clock in the morning, wanted a ride to a bus stop. She'd never seen him before. She called the police. I told her to call you guys and at least let you know. Heads up on it is what was going on there too.
Okay, thank you.
So anyway, that the person who came and called, it's from another group home, and there's offenders in that home. So that's kind of what we're asking for, if we could change some of the language so that doesn't continue. One thing that I wanted to talk about in Article 3 of the presentation, for the 9 or more, it says where the director can waive the neighborhood meeting at their discretion. I think that gives an awful lot of leeway to one person, especially when you're talking about 9 or more, or as we go 5 or more, or 6 or more, or 7 or more. Well, I think unless I misinterpret it. Also, one of the purposes of that we were so angry is that people weren't notified about this, and so by taking that away or giving someone a discretion to pull that away is not what we're looking for. And then again at the last meeting, you mentioned how people can find out that this is going on instead of doing these notifications and doing these kind of addresses. And it talks about, well, people can find out by the permits. And so how do you find out by the permits? You have to go to the city office and say, what permits have been issued? Have there been any building permits been issued in my neighborhood? And seriously, how many of us have time, energy, or even have the knowledge to do that we're going to randomly, just to make sure there's no building permits being issued by anything that we don't know because you've canceled the notifications? Are we truly going to be calling up the office and saying, were there any building permits issued that I need to know about? And do I do this on a regular basis? How often am I supposed to do this? It's a very poor way of notifying the people. What you don't notify, you leave it up to them to go ahead and call the office and ask. I don't know any other city within the metropolitan area that does this. Again, the decisions on the zoning has affected 2 of your most elderly wards, and that was told by us by, I believe, yourself. And it appears that your most vulnerable citizens have been harmed by this zoning. I was thinking on the way home how sad and pathetic that we have to be on guard against our own city government. That these were the people that were voted in to protect us, and the elderly. And now we have to watch and guard, not only against everything else that's going on out in that big cruel world that we have, but now our own city government. And this was passed in April of 2013, and how quickly these contractors moved in and grabbed these spaces. It almost seems like there was something going on there ahead of time. But you guys went after your most vulnerable citizens.
Thank you. I wonder if it'd be worth a quick clarification on the notification issue, and the last speaker spoke of the director's discretion to waive notification, and that language was very specifically intended, and I'll just read it. The requirement may be waived by the director when required by state or federal law based on privacy or security issues, right? And that's the classic kind of battered women situation. So that's where that stipulation applies, right? Thank you. All right, next, Chuck. I'm sorry, it says word 3. Starts with a G. G-U... Gundolac. Thank you, sir. I actually have beautiful penmanship. A couple letters I couldn't quite catch there.
Hello.
Welcome.
Just like to add a couple more comments about the house going up at 835 South Flower regarding the occupancy of the owners and the owner's family. We just heard a question from Mrs. Smith about are they going to go in, and we heard the city planner say it's not in the permit. Well, if I bought a house and built a house, single family, I don't think I'd worry too much about putting my family in that single family house. So what does that mean that it's not in the permit? So that's a question to him. I just want to ask a few more questions on that, which I can't think of right now, of course.
Take your time.
Thank you. I know where I wanted to go with this. I just hope, again, with the family, the 12 occupants and one extra bedroom, it adds up to 19. I hope planning, I hope ordinances, I hope safety is all in on this, saying this all works. No surprises, like the one I just brought up. Why has he got to get a permit to put his family in his own house? Huh? What if there's a few too many people there and it doesn't pass? I'm sure the fire department, all these guys are looking at this, but I just want to call that to your attention. I think it's a little big, a little over the top, and I hope all the city departments are on board on this. Thank you.
All right, thanks. All right, anyone else? Heather?
Hi, my name is Derek Mullen. I'm kind of the spokesperson for the Shelley family on 92 West Alameda and 9300 West Alameda.
How you doing, Derek?
Doing great. How are
Good.
you? We're starting an urban farm and market there. I'm sure most of you guys have heard about us. First of all, thanks for adding apiaries to the mixed-use zone district. It was our understanding that they're going to combine the farm and horticultural definitions. In doing that, we want to make sure that under the farm definition it states something about accessory buildings for farming uses to store tractors and produce and other things like that. We just want to make sure in combining those definitions that that's considered under the horticultural definition. We wouldn't want anybody who's already farming to not be allowed their accessory buildings. We'd also like to say that in the future we'd like to see large and small animals added to the mixed-use zone district as a limited or special use permit sort of items. Address that now, but just want to throw that out there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Derek. Travis?
Yeah, one of the changes that Derek was mentioning was the combination of two definitions that we have that overlap now. We have a definition of farm and a definition of horticulture, and those do overlap. And we're combining those into one definition and just using the term horticulture. I've talked to Derek about the concern of the accessory buildings. Right now, the definition of farm talks about raising crops, and it also talks about being able to have accessory buildings, such as a barn. The new definition of horticulture, the existing and new definition of horticulture, doesn't contain that language, but in our discussions internally, it doesn't need to. We allow accessory buildings, we allow them for single family, we allow them for any use, and the definition itself doesn't need to call out that permission. That permission just exists across all uses.
Okay, thanks. Heather.
Good evening. We had a highly engaging Ward 4 Ward 4 meeting last Saturday. The planning staff member who attended stated the city's party line once again that, quote, no substantial changes were made to the R1 in the legislative rezoning approved December 2012. And I think we heard another variation on that again tonight. This is what staff and all memos stated to residents in the months leading up to this vote. When the city states their message like this, you get, citizen, what you would call inaction. On December 10th, 2012, the public's concerns were discounted with claims of, quote, you've had your chance at input, and you didn't take advantage of it. Therefore, we, as your elected officials, are moving forward. This was despite many concerns that people brought up that night. Tonight, you've heard from citizens that there were significant changes to the R1 zoning that negatively impacted them and other residents who were not able to make it tonight. First, of course, are the large group homes. You've heard the most about those. Second, the group didn't show up tonight, but I've heard from them, are the changes made to the height restrictions in the multi-use districts that affected neighboring R1 districts, such as 35 South Van Gordon, and the impact on the neighbors behind them. I believe that's in Ward 1. Is that right? Third, the setbacks were drastically decreased, which contributed to the Walmart-sized group homes in comparison to their neighbors that you've also heard concerns about tonight, just the size and the towering above the neighboring home. The fourth one that you haven't heard of tonight are the frontages, and I'm asking you to restore the building dimensional standards for corner lots to that which existed before 2013, specifically changing corner lots back to 2 front yards. The change in corner lot frontage has created confusion in the POD counter, and you should see page 368 of your agenda packet, and conflict between neighbors. Complaints have been made in regards to accessory buildings being built on quote-unquote non-primary front yards. Restoring corner lots to 2 front yards will ease the confusion at the counter and alleviate the conflict between neighbors. There are 2 of these sheds in Ward 1 that are being built on the non-primary front. So these are 4 examples of substantive changes that have negatively impacted Lakewood homeowners since December 10th, 2012. To get back, let's see here. Now, to go to the comprehensive plan, if you want involvement and interest in the process, which is why Holly was at the meeting that night, the message you must communicate to the public is that these changes will impact the average homeowner. Homeowners do not feel that they were notified of the rezoning in 2012 and its impacts. You're working hard to make things right now, and I congratulate you and commend you on that. But you may not have had to had you provided real notice of the substantive changes that were being considered and implemented. This idea of doing and then asking for forgiveness later just stinks for the citizens.
Can you wrap things up, Heather?
Yep. So, just the comprehensive plan is not located where I would expect it to be on the website. So for everybody who's listening tonight, I strongly encourage you to go to lakewood.org. It's at the bottom middle of the page, and it's called Moving Forward. It doesn't say comprehensive plan or changes to the city vision and whatnot. So
thanks.
There you go. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else?
Edie Bryan. I would just like to know, after some very lengthy meetings and a whole lot of agitation and a lot of staff time being devoted to a group home in my neighborhood, which is the one on South Newland, I am still confused about what the present status is. I understand that there are some requirements that are required by the Federal Housing Act for group homes. I believe it's 8 and under. But this is one that has 10 bedrooms, not counting 4 additional rooms in the basement. And I am not sure what the status is. We have never had any information as to what type of residents were to be there at all. We have no information on that and have never been provided that. And it seems like, since the city supposedly wants, transparency, and what's the other word? And I'm just asking for the present status of that building, which I understand has a building permit but no identified use and no date of the application of the building permit application. So we don't even know when this was granted. So I'd just like to know the status, and we have not been provided that information.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? All right, with that, we'll close public comment. Any questions or comments from council? Councilor Harrison?
I just had one question that I wanted to talk about, and that was the accessory building for the farm. One of the things I'd be concerned about is that usually additional buildings have different needs. So you might have a building for equipment, and then you might have another building for seeds or whatever. Is there going to be a limit? And I didn't look for this, Travis. I apologize because you just brought this question up. Is there a limit to the number of square footage that would be allowed for accessory buildings on an acreage? Because I would want to give them as much flexibility as we can.
There are different open space requirements that need to be met on the lot, so that's equivalent to a limitation on the amount of space that can be covered with a building. So those requirements would need to be met, whether it's with a principal structure, an accessory structure, or a combination of the both.
I'm going to stop for a second, just ask, as our usual procedure, we'll do the motion in the second, and then we'll have the council discussion. Because if there's an amendment, it can't take place until after we've had the motion in a second.
I move for the adoption of Ordinance O 2014-4 on second and final reading.
Second.
All right. Next was Councilor Paul.
Thank you. I wanted to proceed with an amendment that I spoke about earlier. And could we pull up the two tables so I think everybody's clear? Thank you. Mr. Cox, can these be put together in one with the chart and or would it need to be two?
I mean, the text and the table? Yeah. I'll listen to the specifics as you bring it, but they could be, if they're related, they could be brought together, sure.
So this is what's currently was proposed.
Correct.
And this was a modification that was intended to be more clear that
right.
We're aiming for that 1 to 8.
And so my amendment would be the proposal to adopt this particular format. And then the secondary part of the motion, whether it can take place in this or as a separate motion, would be under C, section 17.4.3.1L, which will direct you to group home, and it currently states under 1, a group home serving 9 or more clients shall be subject to the following. I would like to amend that language to say a group home could be granted a reasonable accommodation for the number of residents based on the following.
Could I suggest you use the word may instead of could?
Sure.
You may.
It came up right before the meeting, so sure. Yeah.
So I'm thinking it needs to be 2, the adoption of this table and then the language separate.
Well, because the table is presented visually and as an alternative to the one that's in there, it might be good to address that first. Yeah.
So I'll make that motion to adopt.
Motion to amend.
The language, we're changing one word from can to may.
Well, that's on the second part.
On the second part.
No. What? Will you put the current one that's in the packet on? That's current. And then proposed.
So,
if you'd like
Vanna White for a second. Does that help?
Or you want
You're
a copy?
free to move closer, Edie.
Yeah. Edie, the first line here says group home 1 to 8. The second line says greater than 8 client residents, and it says see section 17.4.3.1L. The proposed says group home 1 to 8 client residents, all with a P for permitted. It doesn't have anything for group homes of greater than 8, listed. That's admitted, right? Omitted.
Correct, and that's the one I'm proposing to adopt. It's this one.
As presented tonight.
Can I get a second?
Go ahead. No, Edie. We had public comment. If you move closer, if you want to see it. Are you?
Yeah, that's my.
All right. So is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second, and I think we should wait to vote on that until we're done with the all the conversations here. But it is on the table as an amendment. Is that fair?
Well, you would typically at this point see if there's further discussion on the amendment.
That's fair enough. Any discussion on that amendment? Let's raise your hand. Actually, let's do raise a hand so we don't lose track of where we're at. Pete?
Yes, Mayor. I like that proposal, but I'd also like to add on 9 to 12 client. Let me see here. Oh, more than client residents, I'd like to add limited use on R2.
Travis?
I think you're still working off the old version. Mr. Paul is recommending that whole line with the 9 or more residents go away.
Okay.
So the proposal that Mrs. Springsteen was working off the old version where we had that C section, 17, et cetera, right in the middle of the line. Mr. Paul's proposal is that we take out that entire line, and the only line would be group home 1 to 8 client residents permitted across the board, and then there's at the end a supplemental standard that can point you to the reasonable accommodation standards.
Okay, so there would not be a residential 9 to 12? Or
no line with 9 to 12.
Nothing?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Shakti.
I'm just interested if there's any comments from Tim Cox or Travis Parker.
We're talking about the amendment, right? The amendment. We're talking about the amendment. That's cool.
Right. This was brought to our attention late this afternoon, and we did have a chance to look at it, and we're fine.
You're talking about the word changing the word can to may, and then the second table.
Eliminating the line.
Well, yeah, for this motion, going from the table that's in the materials to this alternative table that eliminates the line regarding 9 or more.
Right.
We have no issues with that.
Right.
And that's what the motion currently is about.
Correct.
Is just this. Okay.
It's actually about both.
Well,
my understanding is this motion was just to remove.
Is the table period, and then I'll make a secondary motion after this to amend the language.
Okay.
If I may.
Certainly. All right. Any other questions on that motion? Ramey?
I'm getting a little confused. We are, I know, you're smiling. We are saying then that group homes of 9 or more will not be in residential neighborhoods. Is that correct?
No, actually, nothing that we're talking about here is changing any policy that was adopted a couple of weeks ago. We're just sort of making that information a little bit harder to find in the table.
Speak English.
I mean, before we had a 1 to 8. So there was a 1 to 8, and it's permitted across the board. 9 to more, go to see this section. Now we're just saying 1 to 8 is permitted off the board. You have to work a little bit harder to find the reasonable accommodation language.
So my question is, again, 9 to 12 or 9 plus, is that permitted in residential use?
Only through reasonable accommodation based on the Fair Housing Act.
Okay.
Go ahead, yeah.
If I may explain my motion. So currently, if you remember, one of the issues that we had was dealing with, after we passed the language that is here under 17.4.3.1 L1, this was the language we passed, right? And Travis said that, well, now we need to encapsulate that into a chart, into the chart that shows this. So the first edition of that had 1 to 8 and then 8 greater, which is still confusing, and it points you over. So we consolidated that as my motion to 1 to 8 client residence is permitted in any zone district, which was the intent of our meeting. And then, if you remember, there's a reasonable accommodation that was also explained at length, and then that referenced my second motion. So the chart at hand is permitting, if you just take the motion as it is, the chart at hand is permitting 1 to 8 client residents in every zone district. And that's my motion. And it's seconded.
Would a preview of the second motion be helpful? No? I think that's what's causing the confusion here. We've got one motion on the floor that's referencing a second motion.
Sure. And my second motion would then, as amended from that evening under group home, 1 currently states a group home serving 9 or more clients shall be subject to the following. Does everybody have the A, B, C, D, E, F, and then the 2? So my secondary motion would be to change the language in 1 and say a group home can be granted a reasonable accommodation for the number of residents based on the following. So it removes the word 9 and basically saying you can have 9 or more. There is a potential that you could have 8 or more based on the accommodation standard that was adopted at a previous meeting. That's not going away. But in my opinion, it makes cleaner, it makes the chart cleaner, and it tightens up our definition to say it's just not permitted 9 or more. It's saying there's a reasonable accommodation that could be made, and this is the criteria, A, B, C, D, E, F, to possibly allow for that accommodation.
That may be made.
May be made. Mr. Mayor, just another way of approaching it for anybody who's still confused on that. The charts, the tables, generally tell you what kind of process is necessary for a given use in a given district. So if it's permitted, it's a P for permitted. If it's a limited use, you'll have an L, special use, an S, whatever process it might be. There was a time when some of these homes were a limited use, and that's what we called the process, and that's what you had to do to get through for that type of home. Having it in the chart there to say 1.8 is this, 1 through 8 is this, 9 or more is that, suggests that that one of those uses, one of those processes applies to get a use for 9 or more residents. What you had adopted at the last session on group homes was that there would be a process for reasonable accommodations, which we have to provide by federal law for 9 or more. So I think the point of Councilor Paul's motion, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the presence of 9 or more in the table suggests that that's an allowed use under certain circumstances, when really 1 through 8 is an allowed use, and to do more than that, you need to go through the reasonable accommodation process, and that's set out in the text that Councilor Paul is proposing to amend in the next motion.
Right.
And do you happen to have the text? We can see the text.
It's
the text is what
in
Councilor
your
Paul
packet,
was just
yeah.
referring to.
On page 4-18.
But no. It's in the packet. Councilor Paul is proposing a couple of Shakti.
I would just say that it looks to me like this is just a clarification of what we all agreed on doing in the last
Exactly right.
meeting, just making it clear that we're not trying to do more than that.
We're codifying the very clear intent of council at the last meeting.
I just have another question.
Okay.
We're saying 9 or over. Before, didn't it say 9 to 12? Or am I mistaken? And is there a reason why we have an unlimited amount? I mean, you could go up to 20.
That's where you landed. That's the instruction that the council gave us is to not. I think part of the reason was in saying 9 to 12, we had the number. People saw the number 12, and they said, "Oh, well, then let's shoot for 12." Whereas now the only number in this code is 8, and people see that number 8, and now maybe they'll ask for more than 8, but they don't see a number 12 to shoot for. I think that's
If you have 12, then reasonable accommodation request could be 14. We're trying to get there.
So you want to take a vote on this first motion? I call for a
All
vote.
right. The question has been called on Councilor Paul's first motion, which would, and I'm sorry, we're going to have to delete the speaking lights and start over. I know Councilor Barraway was next. I know Pete and Ramey were just after that. So we have a motion and a second on Councilor Paul's first amendment, which is, please repeat it so everybody's clear. We're going to incorporate the second table we saw tonight, which just has 1 through 8.
Which is up on the board right now.
Which is up on the board behind us. And was, yeah. Is everybody clear, first of all? Yeah.
Okay, cast your votes.
All right. Hang on a sec here. I have to, I don't know if this will work. Without. All right, please cast your votes on the amendment. This would, Councilor Wickman?
Well, I still have questions. I'm confused about this. I just voted, but I'm uncomfortable with my vote. Can I ask some more questions before casting that vote?
It's just on his amendment.
It's just on the amendment. Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, well, I've heard a lot of people go back and forth. I realize I'm not an expert on the subject matter, but there's some citizens out there that really have got into it, and I'm wondering if I might get some input from some of them as to do they understand what's going on, and do they feel like this is meeting their concerns?
So, public comment is.
Well, I know it's not public comment. I'm just asking a question. Is it solving the problem?
So that's not the motion right now, Edie. We're going to get back to you. We're going to get Edie. We're going to get back to you. You are out of order in chambers. You've been a city council member yourself. You know the rules well. You asked a specific question about the home on Newland, and we will get you an answer to that question. That's not what we're talking about here with the motion. Thank you. So, Councilor Wickman.
Well, Anita, you're kind of an expert on this. What are you following all this?
Excuse me. This is my motion that's on the floor.
So either vote yes or no.
And exactly, I'd like an up or down vote.
All right, I'm going to clear the votes. Please cast your votes again. All right, and oh man, please cast your votes again. I'm sorry. And the motion carries 8-2. The nays are Roybal and Wickman. And again, we're trying to limit these to 8, and then reasonable accommodation on top of 8. So that's the clear intention here, as evidenced in that table. So, second motion, second amendment.
I was just going to say, and the last night that we met and discussed this, it was very clear, my understanding from the testimony or from the information provided by Mr. Cox as well as the other attorney who was here that night, that 8 was by right. They are right by use by right, however the phrase goes. In terms of there's a state statute as well that talks about the number of people that are allowed to be in a group home that are disabled. And I thought I clearly remember him saying that 8 was, because I asked the question, how is 8 the magic number?
Right.
And
I believe what you heard from Mr. Berkowitz is that over the years, case law has established, primarily the case law has established 8 as appropriate in certain circumstances and has become a standard in numerous jurisdictions across the country as a result. Not that it is the be-all, end-all. Anything above is unreasonable. Anything below is not appropriate. It's a number that's been used consistently and has been upheld consistently.
So to be conservative, 8 would be a number that we know has already been tried and tested.
It has been tried and tested.
Okay, thank you.
And before I make my second, I think, it's clear that there's 30 different opinions from probably 30 different people on which way this could go or what you could do. And I have received feedback from the community on how to try to work with this. And these are the proposals I'm bringing forward. So if somebody on this council has something else they'd like to bring forward, throw it out there. But I have spent 2 weeks trying to work on this and trying to figure out a solution to the chart and the definition. So with that said, I'll make a motion to redefine under group home, which currently states a group home serving 9 or more clients shall be subject to the following. I would like to have that removed and have it replaced with this language. A group home may be granted a reasonable accommodation for the number of residents based on the following, which will then go A, B, C, D, E, F, and then 2.
Second.
So the basis is 8. So reasonable accommodation is above 8. Correct, Travis?
Yes.
Right.
Any application that we got for a number larger than 8 would be subject to this section.
Which was the way it was prior to my motion. What I'm doing now is, though, under this, it says 9 or more, and we're just clarifying that we've allowed 8. And there is a chance there may be more than 8 with a reasonable accommodation.
But the word may is intended to make it seem like it's not certain, as the word can.
Well, and adding the words reasonable accommodation
Right.
that aren't in there now, so it ties it even more closely to the federal law.
Right. Exactly. Thank you. All right. Motion, second, discussion. Remy.
We did hear some public comment from the one lady that said that the one group home has got 10 bedrooms in it. And I can see that there's going to be some gaming on this.
We can't make policy now that impacts a home that's got a building permit. We can't turn the clock backward on that.
And frankly, Ramey, this could very well happen under my definition right here, and it could happen under what's currently proposed. But I do believe that the definition that I have proposed tightens it up more so than what is in there.
It's a significant improvement. Pete?
Okay, Mayor. I'm still trying to wrap my hands around this whole thing. Now, I understand 1 to 8. Now, the 9 or more, and you're saying you're taking it out of the chart. Mm-hmm. But where in the text is it going to be where it specifies it all out that it's not in residential property or it's not in R1?
Page 197.
Travis?
This is in R1. So if you're looking at the table, I don't know if you guys can see if your screens in front of you have the same thing on the screen behind you. I don't know, but the table says group home for 1 to 8 residents is permitted across the board. Residential zones, mixed-use zones, any zone. If you look at the very end of that 1 to 8 client residence, you see a tiny little asterisk, and that points you to section 17431L. 17431L is the reasonable accommodation that we have to allow in residential zones.
Right. I got it.
Existing and change both languages there. So the existing is there, and then my proposed amendment is in my handwriting.
Okay. So
Minus the code and including that.
with reasonable accommodations, that's the exception, but they would say 9 plus is not normally allowed in residential area. Is that what I'm understanding? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Quinn and then Councillor Harrison. Thanks, Pete.
I just want to say I think this is a very well-crafted clarification of something that was somewhat ambiguous and less than clear in the original ordinance that we approved back in January. So I certainly support this, and I think Councillor Paul did an excellent job of putting this together. Thank you.
Councillor Harrison.
I'll just say ditto, and one other thing is that I think this really helps clarify more and discourage larger homes. I think with the reasonable accommodation clause, that will really make it harder to have huge group homes, and it'll keep it under 8, we hope. So thank you.
Councillor Barraway.
Adam, good job on the wordsmithing. Travis, just one little thing that where we do say 9 to 12 under group home is on page 284 of the packet. It's under parking standards, 17.8.1. So group home, we have 1 to 8 residents with parking standards, then we have 9 to 12. I don't know how. Somebody's still going to see a number 9 to 12.
Very good catch. We can certainly make that change if you so order us. We would love to.
So that would be another amendment.
Yes.
Yeah, and let Cindy do that one. Good catch.
So we'll do, let's finish Adams.
All right. So motion and a second. Any other questions about Adam's second amendment? If not, please cast your votes. Okay, this passes unanimously. Thank you. Great work, Adam. And again, I'm going to say this over and over again. If the foundation, if the basis is 8 everywhere, and then reasonable accommodation starts at 9, it doesn't start at 13.
Well, and I'd thank staff and I'd thank the citizens who worked and helped get us to where we needed to be. Thanks.
All right, you have a motion?
Yes, please. I have a motion on table 17.8.1 to remove the row that said under group home that says 9 to 12 client residents.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and again, this is keeping all the language consistent. Any questions on this? Councillor Harrison? Or comments? I'm sorry. Questions, comments?
Just a question. If there was a reasonable accommodation made to have 9 or 10 in that building, do we need to create parking for those 2 additional people?
If I could make a suggestion, what we might do is just where it now says 1 to 8 client residents, just take the word group home and put it on that line. So there's only one line now, just says group home.
I'm sorry, Travis, are you saying...
So right now we have a group home, and then we have 2 subcategories of group home. Since we're taking away one of the subcategories, we just now have group home.
Oh, I gotcha. So not even 1 to 8.
Just say group home.
Gotcha. So I should actually revise my motion or withdraw.
Or amend it.
Or amend it again.
No, let's withdraw the first motion.
Yeah, Tim, I should withdraw. I'm withdrawing my motion.
All right.
I am going to restate a new motion.
Thank you.
That we eliminate the rows that say 1 to 8 client residents and 9 to 12 client residents, drop group home, either bring up the parking spaces. We're just going to eliminate the language that says 1 to 8 client residences, 9 to 12 client residences, and group home falls into those slots.
Could you clarify the section?
17.8.1 parking standards. Table 17.8.1 : parking standards.
Second.
All right, motion second, discussion. Shakti and Councilor Roybal and Councilor Coop. Actually, I'm going to Shakti and then I'm going to go to Councilor Coop. He had his light on first, and then Councilor Roybal.
I don't have the table up. Currently for up to 8 and over 8, is it a different number of parking spaces?
Currently, there are different standards for the 9 to 12 from the 1 to 8.
So I'm just concerned if there's an implication if we say group homes need to have this many parking spaces, that if there's a larger group home allowed, they won't be required to have more parking spaces?
Okay.
So here's what my intent was on the motion, is that we were just removing the language that says 1 to 8 client residents and it says 9 to 12 client residents. Delete that and then drop in the words group home where those currently reside.
Right. I'm concerned what that implication would be, that if we say group homes with 1 to 8, which is all the ones we allow, so it seems sort of ridiculous to say that. It's clear that that parking standard only applies to those group homes, but where we in fact may need to allow larger group homes, and we may want a different parking standard for those homes.
I'm only eliminating the language. I'm not eliminating the 2 spaces per unit, 5 spaces per unit. I'm not eliminating that language. I'm only eliminating the language that says 1 to 8 client residents and 9 to 12 client residents. What comes to the right of those words will remain the same. You drop in the word group home where the 2 numbers were previously. Is that what you were suggesting?
Well, no, we kind of have to pick a line. So I think we'd have group home with a minimum of 2 units and a maximum of 5 units. Or spaces, excuse me, per group home. And I think Councilor Shakti is saying that the larger group homes now have a range of 3 to 6. Versus under your amendment, everything would have a limit of 2 to 5, which doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, I understand the concern. Is there one parking standard that could be applied to all of them?
So could you not say you've got minimum all districts 2 to 3 per unit, or 3 per, just take the higher, 3 per unit, 6, 5, 4. You're only talking.
We could take the lowest minimum and the highest maximum. So 2 is the minimum and 6 is the maximum.
Mm-hmm.
And have the biggest range.
Mm-hmm. And just have group home.
Yeah.
Eliminate the numbers.
We can use the smallest minimum and the highest maximums. That's fair.
So,
come on, Edie.
So let's use a hypothetical case. Somebody comes in and asks for reasonable accommodation, and it's 10, and we wind up, for whatever reason, allowing it. How many parking spaces would they be required?
They would be required to have at least 2, and they would be limited to no more than 6.
And suppose I'm sorry, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but I think it's the exact question that's being answered. Suppose they, for whatever reason, they want 2. And do you have the discretion then to require 5 or 6? Are you comfortable with that?
We don't know. The current ordinance doesn't, and the proposed amendment wouldn't give. They just have to meet the minimum.
They have to meet the minimum.
Which is 2.
Okay. All right. Councilor Coop?
I would. Ask me to restate it?
Sorry, thank you. I would feel a lot more comfortable if we were going this direction, just have one line to use the requirements for 9 to 12 client residents with 3 spaces per unit minimum, and then a maximum at 6? Or can that line be changed to reflect what was said with Councilor Paul's amendment?
Reasonable accommodation.
Group homes allowed a reasonable accommodation.
Well, and to be quite honest, that they could ask for reasonable accommodation from parking standards instead of, they can ask for reasonable accommodation from building code. There's no reasonable accommodation means reasonable accommodation from whatever's preventing them from housing disabled.
And I'm not talking about limiting their reasonable accommodation, but changing the parking standards if they go over 8. Keeping these standards that are listed in the current form,
the 1 to 5 or the 1 to 8 standards,
and the over 8 standards.
Okay, and just changing that second line from 9 to 12 to 9 and up.
No, to reflect the same language that Councilor Paul asked for in his last amendment with the group homes with reasonable accommodation. Is that, I'm sorry, the city manager is shaking her head like she understands what I'm
I do too.
saying.
Yeah, one thing where, in line with what Travis was just saying about how the reasonable accommodation is not limited to how many people live there. That's what we've spent most of the time talking about, and that's what Councilor Paul's motion referenced. That section about reasonable accommodations is intended to apply whenever anybody requests anything that is a waiver or an exception from a standard of any kind. It could be parking spaces. Mm-hmm. It would seem appropriate in the criteria for granting a reasonable accommodation, again, for any of the requirements imposed on these homes, it would seem appropriate that the city would have the authority to impose additional requirements, additional restrictions, that if a proposal meets the criteria for a reasonable accommodation, but may generate an additional impact, such as the need for further parking space. If it's a bigger house, maybe more cars are needed. The need for additional parking could be imposed as a requirement on that grant of a reasonable accommodation.
As a condition.
Sort of as a condition. So you could have a line in there in the reasonable accommodation criteria that said that the city has the authority to impose additional conditions necessary to mitigate against the impacts of the accommodation.
My recollection of the reading that we were given, though, is that if a reasonable accommodation may mean that, for example, setbacks would have to be, what's the word I'm looking for, would have to be granted a variance because the reasonable accommodation, let's say a wheelchair ramp needed to be put in to allow somebody to use the home, that then our own code would have to have a variance to that. So are you sure that it goes the other way as well, that we can then impose a stricter restriction on them if we're granting them a reasonable accommodation?
Well, to use your example, if you are required to consider a variance, variances can have conditions imposed upon them if the variance might create an additional impact. Is that your question, or are you asking?
Al, I just recall the one example that was given in one of the cases was that one of the examples of a reasonable accommodation was that a ramp could be built so that even though I'm not a planner or building permit person, nor have I been in planning commission, that if it in some way change the setback requirements or anything else that might have been imposed on us when you originally built the home, that has to be allowed because we're allowing the reasonable accommodation. We have to allow them to have that reasonable accommodation. So we have to, in essence, say, well, there isn't a setback because of that.
Right, and I don't think that every type of accommodation requested is well suited for imposing conditions. But I think when you look at numbers and say we've got a house that permits up to 8, and the operator comes in requesting a reasonable accommodation for 10. You apply those criteria, and in applying the criteria to determine is there undue financial impact on the city, does it
Right.
Subvert the entire zoning scheme? If those criteria are satisfied and the accommodation is reasonable, but the effect is to have additional vehicles on the property because of the additional number of people, perhaps, and there's not a direct correlation between people and cars. We know that.
Right.
But if there is an additional impact, a general statement that the city can impose reasonable conditions to offset or mitigate the impact of some change in the standards, that would seem to be, to use a word, reasonable.
I knew you were going there.
Yeah, I knew you knew
with
I
that.
was going there.
So back to your answer to Councilor Coop's question, you're suggesting that, if I remember correctly now, that instead of having the 1 to 8 or the 9 to 12, it would say group homes that meet reasonable accommodation.
What I'm suggesting, I think, as
So there'd be a category that says group home, and there would be a category that says group home that meet reasonable accommodation.
no, in the chart there would be one line that would say group homes,
Okay.
and it would apply. It would use the standards for parking in this instance that are already in place for 1 to 8 residents. That's 2 spaces in
Right.
minimum 2 spaces in all districts, and the maximums that are set forth on that line now. There would not be a second line for larger group homes. Rather, we'd go to that section that we just amended that has the process, the criteria for reasonable accommodation.
Ah, gotcha. Put the
Which
verbiage
applies
in there.
to all reasonable accommodations, not just to the number of people.
Gotcha.
And add a simple sentence that gives the city general authority to impose reasonable conditions necessary to offset or mitigate any impacts caused by the accommodation.
So it sounds like we need 2 motions.
Well,
Go ahead, Adam.
Scott still has the floor, so.
In the conditions that you were just talking about being put in this other section, what is in the line now labeled 9 through 12 client residents, that's what would be implied there?
Well, what would be appropriate is what's appropriate. So that instead of having a numerical standard for any home over 8, there wouldn't be an automatic requirement that you'd have 1 extra parking space if there's 9 or 2 extra parking spaces if there's 11. There would just be the ability to say, along with this accommodation comes an impact, and that impact may be the need, carry with it the need for additional parking. And depending on the circumstances, it might or might not be the numbers in that chart. So that's why I'm suggesting if we're not going to have 9 and or more as a category of group home, that we take that line out of the chart and allow on a case-by-case basis to impose a condition that's reasonable to suit the particular circumstances.
Right. Okay.
Well,
I'm sorry. Well, go ahead.
yeah.
If it's follow-up to this immediate point. Pete, you were next.
I just wanted to clarify, Cindy, can you please restate your motion for us, please?
I think I might be withdrawing it given the conversation that we just had, actually, Pete. So let me try to see where we're – Mayor, is it all right if I try to see where we're at now at this point?
Of course.
Thank you. So on the chart that we currently have in front of us, where it says 1 to 8 residents, it would drop in and say group home. Where it says 9 to 12 client residents, there would not be a row at all there. The reasonable accommodation where we changed the language based upon Councilor Paul's second motion today, where he said a group home that meets reasonable accommodations will be subject to the following. We would then insert language under its 17.4.3, whatever it was, L, and over adding an item G to that would then discuss that should a reasonable accommodation result in the city needing to provide additional conditions upon that, that's where that would come into play. So it could be parking spaces, it could be some other issue, correct? Based upon reasonable accommodations. Tim, am I correct? in summarizing where I think we are now. Okay.
All right. Was that a motion?
So be it. That was a motion.
Second.
All this, I might add, seems to be, as I recall Mr. Berkowitz's comments from a few weeks ago, this is solidly supported by the sort of underlying tenet in the federal housing laws about not being able to fundamentally alter a city's zoning scheme, right?
Right. That's one of the criteria
Right.
for reasonable accommodation.
Yeah. So this discretion, if you will, is fully supported based on that. Tom, did you?
Actually, I don't have anything further. I would support
Okay.
the proposal.
All right.
It's made.
All right. We have a Travis, anything? All right. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please cast your votes. All right. It passes unanimously. Thank you. Good work, everyone. It's never pretty, but doing it in public like this. But again, the intent is clear, and we have really gotten there, I think, in terms of doing everything we possibly can to limit the size and scope of these homes. Councilor Roybal, comments?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to make a couple of motions here.
We will, yeah.
Making a motion to change client residence to client and resident staff.
Second that.
Just a little bit of clarification there.
Councilor, and where is that?
I disagree.
That is in the. I know I wrote it down here, but it's in there. I think it's the definitions.
We need a specific section.
17.4.3.1. It looks like it is.
Well, you're looking at theirs.
17 point.
If you could just tell us which section it's in, Councilor Roybal, so we can all track it, triangulate it.
It's 17.4.3.1L.
Okay, which is the very one we've been talking about.
It's not. I didn't see that in there.
I think you mean in the table. The table has that language.
Could you help point that out? I don't see what you're talking about.
Was under definitions.
If you could please point out where this is, it would be most helpful. Thank you.
We're looking quickly. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's page 4-3 in the code. It's the beginning of the use table. Well, actually, it's on the screen. If we,
Or it was?
could be. No, the PowerPoint.
It's in the use table, the use chart.
Is that the only place?
Well, it might be in the definition, too. Oh, fair enough. What is this definition?
So 1 to 8, is that what you're talking about? 1 to 8 client residents? Councilor Roybal?
I believe so. Yes.
So your motion is to, on table 17.4.1, change 1 to 8 client residents to 1 to 8 client and staff residents?
Yes.
Are staff residents?
It can be. In order to make that change, I don't think it's sufficient to just make it here. We'd have to also amend the definition of group home to
Right.
Okay, and that was my second motion also, is to reinstate the definitions of the group homes from 2012, which read, group homes will not include a hotel, motel, rooming, housing, or facility housing adults or juvenile offenders.
I know.
Councilor Barraway?
Well, I was going back to the first one about the clients, 1 to 8 client and residents and staff. If I could ask our attorney, my understanding from the Fair Housing Act is that group homes, it's up to 8 residents. And if you could maybe elaborate on that.
Right. Again, the number 8 has been derived from cases finding that that number is generally appropriate as a limit on the number of group home residents, separate and apart from staff. Now, staff, a group home can have staff persons living on the property if they so choose, or they can have day shifts, night shifts, what have you. So this proposal would be to say no more than 8 people can live there, whether they work there or live there. No more than 8 can sleep in the property. So it's a policy change from what you approved at the last.
Go ahead.
So to me, residents are people that are living there on, I know it says a temporary or permanent basis, but if I'm staff and I'm going to stay there for the night, for 2 nights out of the week, but yet I still have a home elsewhere, to me, that's not somebody that's living there. That's someone that works there.
Well, you might have the situation where the operator is also the staff, where you might have the people living on the property themselves and running the facility. That is their home, but they also work there. But regardless, I think what you're talking about kind of gets to the enforceability or the enforcement challenges. What does it mean to have a staff person living on the property? How often do you have to live there? What do you do to determine whether that is the person's primary residence or not? The client residents presumably stay there virtually all the time. And they have the need for being in a place like that, and that's how that number is determined, based on who's living there night in and night out. Staff people, if it is not truly their primary residence, I'm not sure that they would count in the limit of the number of people who can stay there.
Okay, thank you.
Let me ask the question a little different way. Isn't the foundation of our policy and that of many other cities, and that emphasized by Mr. Berkowitz a few weeks ago, isn't that based on 8 residents?
That's what we discussed in the last session.
This would be a fundamental change.
Right. In order to be in compliance with the Fair Housing Act. Thank you. Councilor Harrison.
I just wanted to ask Councilor Roybal, the purpose of your amendment here, is that to try to eliminate or limit the total number of people that can be under that roof down to 8 people? Is that your focus?
What I'm trying to limit it to is the total amount of people that are living there, including, let's say if you have a owner-operator that's there and it has 1 person, and then you have 7 clients there, then that would be 8. Does that make sense?
I think so.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor to change that. Let's take it one at a time here, like we did the last time. We've got the table, and the table is 17.4.1, the use table, to change the language on the use table under group home to 1 to 8, client and staff residents.
Or
client.
No, two staff.
1 to
client resident, 2 clients and staff, residential staff.
To client and staff residents. Is that fair?
Clients and resident staff.
All right, clients and resident staff.
Mr. Mayor, I did just want to point out that we are looking at 17.4.1 as it has already been amended tonight or proposed to be amended.
So it's to be an amendment to the
table.
amendment.
Yeah, it's not the table that appears in our books.
Correct.
As it's been affected by the amendment.
All right. So, and Councilor Wickman has seconded that motion. I will not be supporting it. I'm not comfortable that it aligns the city with the Fair Housing Act, as we have sometimes rather painfully been through over these last weeks and months. So I just don't think it meets either the intention or the case law which has been so meticulously outlined to us. So please cast your votes. A vote of yes would be in favor of the amendment, and a vote no would be against it. And the motion fails 2-8. The noes are Murphy, Shakti, Johnson, Quinn, Paul, Coop, Barroway, and Harrison. Is there a second amendment? Councilor Roybal.
There is.
Thank you.
To reinstate the definition of the group homes, the original definition from 2012 states group homes will not include a hotel, motel, rooming house, or facility housing adults or juvenile offenders.
Travis?
Is the motion to reinstate the entire definition
No,
from
it's
2008?
just to add that specific area, and it's adding it to the definition.
Okay. I mean, those things are not a part of the definition now. You're saying...
And I would like to add them to the definition.
I think the confusion is you said 2012 definition.
That's language from the 2012 definition that you want to reinstate.
Correct. And I read the definition, which is group home will not include a hotel, motel, rooming house, or facility housing adults or juvenile offenders.
I don't necessarily have a problem. It's true whether you add it or not. That it doesn't include that whether you add that language or not. So I don't necessarily think there's a problem with that. My one question might be rooming house. I don't know that we have a definition for rooming house. So that may be troublesome.
What about boarding house?
I don't think we define boarding house either.
All right. Let me make sure we're clear on the motion. We've got a number of folks that want to comment on it here. Could you repeat the motion again, Councilor Roybal?
I would like to add on to the definition, which goes as follows. Group home will not include a hotel, motel, rooming house, or facility housing adults or juvenile offenders.
Travis?
No, we're just comparing existing definitions, and yeah, it's not a hotel now, it's not a motel now, it doesn't allow juvenile or adult offenders. Rooming house we don't define, so we don't use that term in our code.
Okay,
so
then I can take that out.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Councilor Paul?
Could you expand on that, please, Travis, as to it not allowed? Are you going off a use chart?
Well, under the we have a separate definition for hotel and for group home, and they're mutually exclusive.
Okay.
A hotel has its own definition, and a group home has its own definition. So I think it's unnecessary, but I don't think it necessarily harms anything either.
Okay.
And we do have correctional facilities, which is, defines the adult and juvenile offenders. That's a separate definition. So we have all these things under other definitions.
No, it's not going to have problems with the computer. So, can I ask
Mr.
Roybal a quick question here? So I'm trying to weigh what Travis has said and what you're saying. Is there a concern that a group home is going to come in under a hotel use?
Well,
or vice
I just
versa?
want to make sure that it doesn't. I'm looking toward the future to make sure that we cover and close all the loopholes as possible when we make this ordinance.
Sure.
Is there a need? Is there a need? Evelyn?
I'll just play the devil's advocate and indicate that there's a whole host of other things that group homes aren't. We have a whole host of uses that are defined, and if it meets one of those definitions, it's subject to those regulations. We have a definition for motel, we have a definition for hotel, we have a definition for correctional facilities. If it meets any of those definitions, it would have to meet the use permissions for those uses. It wouldn't be permitted likely in a residential zone district. A ridiculous hypothetical is it's also not a fueling station, right? But we don't have to say that right. We don't have to say the things that it's not in order for us to be able to enforce those land use regulations. And I mean that respectfully. I'm just trying to throw out other ideas.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out down the road, if and when certain group homes come in, I want to make sure that they're not allowed to come in certain areas. And that's what I'm trying to do here. But if you have that covered, I will withdraw my motion.
I can say with a good amount of certainty that we have that covered.
Okay. I will withdraw my motion.
Can I just follow up to that?
Sure.
Councilor Roybal, I appreciate where you're coming from for sure and trying to make sure we have it tight. So I definitely appreciate that.
Yep. All right. Councilor Johnson.
Well, actually, I'm sorry you withdrew it. I don't see a downside to putting that language in. We've got a lot of motels on West Colfax. I just don't see a downside to adding this particular language. And if it was in there originally, I'm not sure why it was taken out.
Well, part of the reason it was in there originally is because it was part of a longer definition that, going back to the fruit, it was part of a list. The old definition said a group home is this and this and this and this, and so then they followed up by saying, and it's not this and this and this. It was a very convoluted and complicated definition. And that was one piece of a larger puzzle that was incomplete in of itself and troublesome. And that's why we went to the broader, plainer, clearer definition. It's not going to harm anything to have it in there, but it's really unnecessary.
I agree.
All right. Are there any other questions? I would just remind everyone that the item on the floor now that we've gotten through all the amendments, at least to this point, is Ordinance O 2014-4, amending the Lakewood Ordinance and Zoning Map. Are there any other questions regarding that? Councillor Wickman and then Councillor Shakti.
Well, I'm not sure if I understood the parameters of your last question, but at some point I wanted to bring up the part about the question about the corner lots having two frontages. I don't know where would be the proper place to bring that up, but I would like to bring that up.
Is there a question?
Well, I'd like to make a motion that somebody asked that we make the motion to define corner lots as having two frontages or something like. I don't remember the exact wordage.
I'll try to address that. Corner lots always have had, old code, new code, we didn't change anything about frontages. Corner lots have two fronts, and we have, in the old code and in the current code, defined one as the primary front and one as the non-primary front. And the main distinction is that there are some different setbacks on the non-primary front than the primary front. And again, none of that changed from 2012 to 2013. There have been some accessory dwellings that people have raised concern about that have gone up in the last couple of years. Structures, not accessory dwellings, accessory structures that have gone up in the last couple of years, but not as a result of any changes to the code.
Well, I have to admit, I just heard it for the first time under public comment, so, I'm not comfortable discussing it, but they raised an issue, and I would like to make sure it's addressed, and I'm sure that person's probably gone.
I can follow up on that.
Follow up, Councillor Paul.
Well, I'm hesitant to try to make policy tonight on a comment that the counselor who's making the motion doesn't even understand what the situation is. So I would try to steer clear of that. My question, though, and maybe I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but yep.
Okay. I don't believe we have a motion on the floor. I haven't heard a motion from Councilor Wickman, so it's a reference to public comment. But okay, let's see, Shakti and then Ramey. Councilor Johnson.
So I want to say a little bit about there was a little bit of discussion. Derek came down earlier to talk about the definitional change. And I'm just going to read a little bit from the email that they originally sent me because I feel like it communicates pretty clearly. So my name is Camise Mullen. They're over here. And this is the second long meeting they've sat through. So, my family homesteaded 2 sections between Alameda, Mississippi, Garrison, and Union in 1876. The majority of the property was held by my family until the Denver Ordnance Plant, now the Federal Center, began construction in the 1940s. The windmill located on Addenbrook Park was built by my great-grandfather, John Everett, and Tom Addenbrook was my grandfather's cousin. As you can see, we have a long Lakewood history. My family is blessed to still hold the last remaining 7.6 acres of our family homestead. It is our goal to leave something for our family's future generations. My husband and I, with my grandmother's permission, have been attempting to get permits for doing agriculture on this property. They want to do urban farming and have a farm stand, and it seems like a great location for it. So I think that there's we've worked something out. It's easy to do, and I'm really happy that we have people interested in doing things in this community that will add so much. So, and then on that note, I did have a question about what is the status of animal use on the property? What animals can
on that particular property?
Yeah.
So that property is zoned a mixed-use neighborhood, which does allow horticulture, so they can grow crops on that. It doesn't, in and of itself, allow small or large animals in that zone as a permitted use. However, that use has historically had horses and small animals on it. So we have talked with them about issuing them a non-conforming use permit to continue the use of horses and small animals on that property.
Okay. And then I also wanted to, I appreciate there's some clarification about parkland that is probably unnecessary. It's just repeating, but I appreciate that it's there. City-owned land which is used or held for open space or park purposes should not be permitted to be used for any other purposes. I just appreciate that's included. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you. Travis, you and I spoke about this earlier. I don't know if this is the time, but somebody actually did bring this up sooner regarding the size of accessory buildings. And there has been an issue in Ward 1. They are not accessory, they're not ADUs, but they are large buildings that are like maintenance type, correct? At some point, I hope that we can address that. And I think that was part of the issue on the corner land is that there are some properties that are putting these very large structures on what would have been a backyard, but basically they have like 2 front yards, I think is the context, Dave. At some point, we just need to study that and figure out how to deal with it.
I'd be happy to. I think that is the crux of the issue that was brought up earlier. It's not how we define fronts on a flood. It's the fact that somebody's putting a big thing in their backyard that happens to be on a corner so you can see it. And we'll be happy to take a look at that and bring some suggestions back to the council at a future date.
Thanks, Travis.
All right. Any other comments on Ordinance 2014-4? Seeing none, I'm ready for... go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, we're getting ready to vote.
We're going to have to vote on what's now called an amended motion, but we are going to vote here.
Are we voting on the entire ordinance right now?
Not until we're done discussing it, but that will be the next step.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right. All right. So, if there's no other comments, we will need a new motion since we'll just need to add a word, right?
So I move for the adoption of ordinance.
I'm sorry, Tim.
I'm thinking he might have it.
All right.
Listen to the proposed motion.
Okay. Thank you. Margie has has taken care of me up here. With the, I'm assuming. I move for the adoption of ordinance 2014-4 as amended on second and final reading.
That would work.
Nailed it.
As long as everyone's clear on what the amendments did.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Councilor Johnson.
We're now voting on the ordinance, correct?
We're voting on the ordinance, and we're discussing the ordinance and maybe even how we're going to vote.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say a little brief statement first. After reading and rereading and rereading the updated zoning ordinance, I have a few thoughts and comments I'd like to bring forth. First, I've been asking myself, frankly, what is the real reason for a zoning ordinance in the first place? I am new to land use issues. First, maintain the character and integrity of our communities, in large part our residential neighborhoods. Ward 1 has many older farmhouses. Having grown up in Lakewood, we have really changed over the years. We started out agricultural and rural, and we are evolving to a more urban model. It has been a slow change. Second, zoning ordinances are used as a guideline to prevent a free-for-all environment. Basically, to prevent some players from taking advantage in an unregulated system that would allow just about anything, anywhere. Third, zoning ordinances help to maintain property values through the use of code enforcement. That is huge. Fourth, it gives a consistency to our heritage. We are evolving into a large city with all the related growing pains of what that means, but we still have large parts of our community that are agricultural. We must be sensitive to those areas that remain more rural and agricultural. Zoning ordinances are a way to go from what was to what will be. Basically, our vision of how this city is going to look in 20 to 50 years from now. We are defining what our neighborhoods will look like, frankly, when most of us are going to be gone. That is a very weighty responsibility. Zoning ordinances integrate safety issues into the way we organize our community. They give developers guidelines of residential neighborhood expectations, i.e., the group home issue. But for me, the most important thing is in a zoning ordinance should reflect our citizen values, needs, and visions of what we collectively want to look like and feel like. I've left out a lot of things. A few questions roll around in my head. There have been significant increase in townhome permits. It is curious if this is totally related to the construction defect litigation, or curious if this is related or marketplace need to have developers decided on this kind of construction because of their belief in our high density. Second, are we creating a city that will be a center for an apartment and townhouse community based on high density? When reviewing landscape requirements, the words shall and require in terms of how many and what kind of trees need to be planted on residential property were cited frequently. As a city and even our state government is sensitive to unfunded mandates and local control, by using language such as shall and require, Are we not doing to others what we don't like to have done to ourselves? I think it is at least a legitimate question to ask. By requiring certain landscapes, are we interfering with personal property choice and rights? The intent is honorable, and I agree with the intent, but it still is fair to ask. After reading the document, I believe it reflects a city with its underlying foundation and vision of one of very high density. Personally, I do not think that's where most citizens buy into this same vision. We had about 140 citizens participate in the beginning process of the comprehensive plan out of about 144,000. Because of timing, we are needing to make tweaks before the new comprehensive plan is finalized, and that's really bad timing. That's unfortunate. We have accomplished creating high-density vision through using mixed-use zoning that is imposed right next, in some cases, to residential areas by decreasing setbacks, and my personal favorite, ADUs with the use of by right. A Western value is that folks like land around them. Decreasing setbacks, to me, kind of flies in the face of that value. My personal belief is that higher density will occur naturally. But this ordinance reflects a force-fit template of high density on the entire city very quickly. We are going from agricultural to urban in warp speed. Many people have told me they want high density in appropriate settings and understand it's going to happen, but think we are going way too fast. We need to be grateful that we're a residential city and, frankly, not an industrial city. Many years ago, the city tried to increase density and allowed numerous 2- and 3-story apartments in an agricultural residential area near 12th and Carr. They have permanently changed the character of that neighborhood and community. I want to be extremely clear. My no vote is not a protest. I am not trying to be obstinate or contrary or a pain in the ass. I'm sorry I said that. Let us remember, even the Supreme Court has a minority opinion.
Councillor Paul?
I'm not quite done.
I'm sorry.
This ordinance reflects many good guidelines, and we've made some very necessary changes. Very good people have been involved in this process and given it a lot of time, and you need to be commended. I appreciate that. It will pass, and it should pass. I just personally cannot support an ordinance that is all about increasing high density at such a fast pace.
Thank you. Councillor Paul?
Thank you. I will kind of take the opposite approach, and I'd like to say, this ordinance has come a long way from, I think, 1970, late 60s, 70s, when we adopted the Jefferson County Code. And, as we've progressed as a city, the inevitable has come. When Denver Water built the reservoir system 100, 150 years ago, they were planning for what would come, and it is here. And we're trying to plan for the future. And the fact of the matter is we're an infill community that's going to continue to see growth. So where does that take place? In appropriate places. There's places for density, and there's places for rural character where we're able to continue to celebrate the heritage. And when you drive around certain parts of the city, you could be in Belmar in a 3 or 4 story, and you could be 10 blocks away and there's a horse property. And this zoning ordinance doesn't change any of that. It protects it. It's not perfect. That's why we're here tonight, because we knew as we implemented it and we'd work on it that things would need to change. And we're here. And this body, I think, is committed to continue to be here as we foster in this new stage, in this new era. And, I don't want to discount the work of 145 people. Yeah, it's not a big, it's not a lot of folks, but those folks came out and participated, and it was a diverse group of folks who had very, different interests and came from different areas. My ward, in some respects is much different than the wards as you get east. But everybody participated. We put this together, and staff has been here along the way to really foster trust, I believe, amongst people. And it's been a battle. It's been a battle for staff. It's been a battle for some of the council members. And the criticism that, well, we were just trying to slide this in with chickens and goats. That's not it at all. I sat at many meetings where we said, this document's 200 pages thick. It doesn't have to, we're not trying to talk chickens and goats. It's comprehensive. It means a lot of different things. So I'm excited to move forward, but moving forward means that we're not abandoning this. We'll continue to be here to work on it and to improve it where we need to be. And I really appreciate this council and their efforts to be responsive, each and every one in their own ways, and definitely staff and the citizens who've come out and given the feedback. And we've sat through some really, really tough meetings. But at the end of the day, change is always tough. And as we continue to progress as a community, we're going to be faced with change every day. And it's not something I'm going to run from. It's something that I'm going to embrace. And I think this zoning ordinance embraces it. Thanks.
Thank you. I will gently remind everyone that we are, yes, we're voting on an entire ordinance here, but our purpose is to vote on the adjustments, the 6-month updates, the tweaks, if you will. And certainly, I would just, again, gently remind everyone that a no vote on the ordinance is also a no vote on the protections we just tried to put in on the amendments for the group homes in our neighborhoods. So please keep that in mind. And I'll have an overall comment later. I think Shakti was next.
I just wanted to add to that conversation that part of having, as we have a bigger population, part of having open, low-density areas is having other areas that are high density. And it's important to me to have that range, and I think that's why I'll be supporting it.
Councilor Barraway?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, we go back to this was about a 3.5-year process. We had a lot of citizens involved. We had various open houses. We had information that went out via mail, via email, on the website. And I know that the Citizens Advisory Group was very concerned about making sure that we protect the neighborhoods that currently exist. So where there's high density is in areas where high density seems, I guess logical might be the word, because it's near a transit station or it's in an area that doesn't have the neighborhoods that have. We have wonderful neighborhoods in our city, and I think that the diversity of the housing stock that we have in the city of Lakewood is what draws people to the city of Lakewood. But we're going to need to also provide for some of our citizens that no longer need that 1 acre lot and have to mow the lawn, and now they're ready to move into something that they can walk away by turning the key and going away for a vacation or whatever they're going to do, and someone else is taking care of the property for them because now they're in a more of a high density area. So we do need the diversity, and this zoning ordinance isn't, I don't know that I would say that we've had a huge rush of people coming to build in the city of Lakewood in terms of high density, but where it is coming is in an area that didn't have anything. I mean, the Target site has just been sitting there vacant. And as the mayor pointed out, tonight's vote was about making the tweaks to the changes that we needed to make to the zoning ordinance to make it a better product than we had in 2000, when it was December 2012. So I'll be voting for it.
Councilor Harrison?
I just wanted to add that I will be supporting this as well. I was part of that citizens group that went through this for 3.5 years. And one of the things that I would say is we had a lot of really diverse opinions and thoughts and whatnot. And we tried very hard to protect as many areas as we possibly could without making any changes so that people could still have their horses and they could still have a lot of things that are really important to them. I think these tweaks are really good. And what's even better about this is a living document. We will make changes again in the future because Lakewood's going to change in the future. So I think we go with what we've got. We do the very best we can and know that at some point in the future we're going to have to change. Thank you.
All right, I'll just close by saying, I've said this before, I may not know a lot, but I know two things for certain. I know, number one, in the future we're going to have more people, not less people. And number two, I know that we have no vacant land to build on. And that's the foundation of how we need to approach looking at our future. And this original zoning document, which we're tweaking tonight through the painstaking work of many people over a long period of time, tried its best to address the certainty of future growth by allowing for density in places where it's appropriate, the light rail stations, for example, and our arterial corridors, the Alamedas, the Wadsworth, and the Kiplings. At the same time, we've taken great pains to try to protect the character of the single-family neighborhoods that we all treasure so much. So I think we've struck the balance, and I certainly will be voting in favor of it in order to protect, in order to codify the protections that we've put in on the group homes tonight. So with that, please cast your votes. And it passes 8-2. The noes are Johnson and Wickman. So thank you is hardly enough, but I do want to say thank you to Travis and the whole planning staff. This has been a gargantuan effort from start to finish. So we fulfilled our promise of doing a 6-month update. We dealt, with some very difficult issues along the way, particularly the group home issue. I absolutely believe we did the best we possibly can, given the constraints that we are under from the federal laws. So thank you again, and thank you to council. Hard work by a lot of folks. All right, we move on to general business, and will the clerk please read item 8 into the record?
Item 8 is Ordinance O 2014-6, amending Title 5 of the Lakewood Municipal Code by adding a new Chapter 5.29 regarding licensing of commercial waste haulers operating in the city of Lakewood, Colorado.
Thank you. I would just, I believe Councilor Roybal pulled this. We can have a discussion about it now. I would, again, gently remind everyone that first reading is about scheduling, so we don't want to be talking about the pros and cons or the merits. Councilor Roybal?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with you. And keeping that in mind, I'd like to be well informed, and I'd like to know the issues and what's going on with the actual ordinance before I vote on it. And I believe after looking at all the film on study sessions and looking to see if we've had any study session on it, I don't believe we have. So I'm asking if we can postpone this and have a study session before we move forward.
Okay. And again, in the context of timing, and I'm going to defer to Councilor Quinn on this as well, but we have had, this process actually began in 2008. It's been a long time coming, and I believe it's high time that we get to it. We have had August 2010, a work plan presentation to City Council listed as a top priority. January 2011, discussed as a goal at our retreat. March of 2011, study session focused on trash hauling at Red Rocks Community College. March 2013, presentation at a study session. So there has been a lot of presentations. Councilor Quinn.
Yes, just to add to that, this is something we've been discussing for years. And actually, this was part of an ACIC proposal that was made back in 2008 by the, I believe it was the Sustainability Committee at that time. I'm not sure. I think it had a different name. I don't remember exactly. So this has been part of an ongoing discussion, and it is a very small, without getting into the merits. I was about to do that, so I'm going to stop myself. But I think that discussion has been ongoing for quite some time. I think there's time between now and second reading to get those legitimate questions answered. Certainly, I think you're well-intentioned in your in bringing this up, but I think there's certainly the opportunity to get that information prior to the next meeting.
Well, I'd like to be well informed and let staff give me the presentation so I would understand what they're saying to me.
Well, I'm sure they'll do that on the night that this is proposed.
Well,
there'll be a presentation that night.
I don't have time to research it. What I'm asking is if we can have another presentation.
Councilor Johnson?
I don't think it's necessary.
Did you call on me?
I did, yes.
Thank you. Travis, we had a little bit of a conversation about this earlier today, and at that point you told me we have not had a regular study session on it. Is that correct?
Well, as the mayor said, there have been discussions of it at study sessions. So this topic has been talked about on and off for a couple of years.
But never a true study session.
The proposal that's before you tonight would be a 3-minute study session. It's just to create a license. So, I mean, I was planning a presentation in 2 weeks. It's extremely short, and it's just who has licenses and who doesn't, and what having a license means. So I don't know that there's enough here to warrant a study session. Mm-hmm. And I'd be happy to meet with both of you and anyone else, this week to give you the information you need to prepare.
Councillor Paul?
Thank you. I would just, and I feel like I'm pretty informed on this, and maybe it's just because I've been on council a little bit longer, but I would encourage, if you read the ordinance, it's pretty simple, and then take advantage of staff these next 2 weeks to really dig in and get your feeling. I mean, that's really our job to do that, and 2 weeks is adequate. I mean, it's a 2 or 3 page ordinance, so.
Edie, please. Councillor Wickman?
I concur. Whether I'm an expert or anybody, all 11 of us are, this is an issue that impacts the community. And I think the community needs to know what's going on, and I would like to get their input. And to do this in 2 weeks' time, I think is inappropriate. And there's no hurry. I'm not aware of any crisis that needs to be resolved. So I say let's take our time. Let's involve the community, and let's study this thoroughly. So I agree. We ought to delay it.
Mayor,
okay.
Pardon me. Mayor,
sure.
That's accurate. There isn't a time sensitivity here. So if you want us to present a public meeting, which would be a study session, we can certainly do that, and we can push this back. So it's up to you. There isn't a reason from a time perspective that this needs to be approved by a date certain.
Right.
So.
At the same time, the scope of this proposed ordinance is very, very narrow. We're not talking about a citywide recycling program or any such thing.
That's accurate.
We're talking about a license, a $50 a year license. Councillor Quinn, do you have any more comments?
I don't want to see this delayed indefinitely, which is my concern. If we try to schedule this for a study session and plug it into some future date, this is something that I've been working on and with people on staff for nearly 3 years. We've been talking about licensing for 3. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be raising my voice, but we've been talking about this for a long time. So if we're going to set it for a study session, I want it plugged into one in the very near future, not put out several months, because there have already been unnecessary delays on this. I mean, I think we have a citizen survey that says that people are concerned about, they want curbside recycling. It's in there. This is a step forward. Right now, we don't have any information on waste haulers in Lakewood. We don't have that information because we don't license them. This is just a simple step forward in that direction. That's all it is. We're not creating a whole new...
If we had a study session very soon, would that be a reasonable compromise?
I still don't think it's necessary, but if it could be scheduled on top of another existing study session, I could live with that. But my concern is I don't want to set out months, because it's been sitting there for a long time. But yeah, if we could do it quickly, I could live with that.
So, So we have a motion, and we have a motion and a second on. Actually, there isn't a motion.
Well, Mayor, I'll make a motion that... Oh, thank you. I'll make a motion that we have a study session in the near future, as soon as it's possible, and then we just go from there.
I second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I will not be supporting the motion. Please cast your votes. And And it fails 4-6. The noes are Murphy, Shakti, Quinn, Paul, Coop, and Barroway. And again, this is a very, very narrow matter. We just have to start to get the ball rolling on the big question, and that's the purpose of this ordinance. So there will be a good presentation in 2 weeks and ample information available on our website and for anyone that asks. All right. What else here? Actually, put away my agenda.
Mayor, we still need a motion to move forward with the public hearing on this.
That's right. It was on the consent agenda, but was pulled, so that we need.
Oh, that's right. That's
right. Pass it on first reading.
Yeah, I am going to need help in wording this motion.
Move
this
the adoption
would be
of
like the consent agenda, only it's isolated to the one ordinance. Okay. So it would be a motion to pass ordinance number on first reading.
Which ordinance was
and to
that?
schedule the public hearing for the date specified.
He has the wording.
He does.
Here it is.
Okay, Mayor Murphy, I move for the ordinance 0214-5 to be included in the consent agenda items introduced into the record by the city clerk.
It's actually 6.
Well, I don't think you need to refer to the consent agenda any longer because it was pulled from there. So I think you can simply say you move to pass ordinance number.
It's 2014-6.
2014-6 to pass on first reading and schedule for the public hearing on the date set forth. We have that
within the ordinance. Yes.
In the ordinance, it's in the ordinance. Says the 24th.
I move for approval of ordinance 2014-6 to introduced in the first reading to be published in the Denver Post with public hearing set for the date included in the ordinance.
That's good.
Thank you.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. And it passes 9-1. The nay is Councilor Wickman. All right. Executive report, Ms. Hodson. All right. On to reports. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. That's coming up later this week.
Yeah, 2 quick things. Derek, I just want to commend your family over there. Your little guy, you brought him out for 2 council meetings, and I don't think anybody's even noticed he's been back there. So he's just crashed out. He must be really boring. That's cool. And secondly,
we found a cure for insomnia, apparently.
I wanted to share some great news, and that came from Reg Cox, who's been, as you know, part of the Lakewood Pastors Group, and they've really taken on Foothills Elementary, and they have a report that their reading scores are going up, and they're going up substantially. So through their work and through Whiz Kids, Foothills Elementary is seeing some real progress, and as most of you know, the Field of Dreams is coming on board. So it's a really cool deal, and hats off to all the folks in that community who've been involved. And I think they have 50-plus tutors from the neighborhood who go and tutor those kids, so that's fantastic.
Thanks, Adam. I ran into Reg at Pastor Cox, I should say, at Whole Foods at lunch today, and we had a nice little visit. He's on a roll up there, just doing great things. So thank you so much. All right. Shakti? No. Councilor Roybal?
No report.
Councilor Johnson?
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to say one more time that this Saturday, Councilor Karen Kellen and myself are having our ward meeting at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. We are having several speakers from AA to come and talk about the awesome impact that they have with people that are struggling with alcoholism. If you know somebody personally or somebody that you just know of that's dealing with this, alcoholism is a disease. It is not a behavior. We will be there at 9 o'clock. Please come and listen to what they have to say and what they are and what they are not. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Quinn.
Thank you. And I also note to the folks over here, I think I heard 1876 was when it was homesteaded. Well, that's the year Colorado became a state. I mean, that's just amazing. My grandfather was born in 1874. I tell people that. Of course, and obviously I never met him. But anyway, that's so interesting. Thank you to Councilor Shakti for telling us about that. Secondly, I also wanted to apologize to the four of you up here. I was not getting irritated with you. You were just happened to be the people right in front of me a few minutes ago. So I do apologize for that. And we are having our Ward 5 meeting next Friday, February 21st, at our Savior's Church. And we're going to have a speaker from Public Works to talk about traffic issues. And I will not be there, but and actually I won't be here next Monday either because I'm going to be giving a presentation at a conference that has nothing to do whatsoever with what I do with the city. But oh, I have the wrong week. Okay, well then never mind. Forget I said it. Thank you.
So on that note, I will say that we won't see you next Monday night because it's President's Day. It's a holiday. Mayor Murphy, Councilor Koop, and I had a chance to attend the Lakewood Historical Significance on Debbie Baker's home. It's her father's home at 975 Reed
Street.
It's a beautiful log home that he started building in the late 1940s. It was completed in 1952, and it is an absolutely amazing place that her grandparents lived in for many years, and then she inherited it. And he also built, his last name was Stage, and he actually built stage coaches, and one of his stage coaches was used in the movie Stagecoach from the 1960s. So if you do any history checking on that one, look in the 1960s, the Denver Post, you'll see Jim Stage. And then this home is just phenomenal. And so very proud of Miss Baker for being able to take the time and effort to make sure that home got onto the historical registry. It's just amazing. So congratulations to her.
Councilor Wickman.
No report, but Ramey, thank you for the cookies. I love homemade chocolate chip cookies. Thank you.
Councilor Harrison.
No report. Let's go home.
All right.
No report.
Margie, Tim, Kathy. All right, we are adjourned at 10:20. Thank you all very much.
How'd you do? Nice people, fine people, Arabian people. Yes, yes, I've met some very nice people. Some very, very, very nice people. But you meet the nicest people in your dreams. It's funny, but it's true. And that's where I first met you. And you're the nicest, paradisest thing I ever knew. I've looked the universe over, from Wackanack to Dover, and now that we have met, how sweet it seems. I love you more the more I know you, which only goes to show you, you meet the nicest people in your dreams.